Hi, good morning, everybody. Welcome. Hello from Washington State. I'm Dr. Julie Kinn. I'm a research psychologist with DHA Connected Health, and I'm joined today by Dr. Renee Kavanaugh, who is our lead subject matter expert for our training and education program. We're so glad to be with you today. Thank you for your flexibility in switching to our living rooms instead of us coming down and seeing you in person. We're hoping that can happen again in the future. Before we get started, though, I'd like for everyone to go down to the chat pod that, whoops, sorry, I always get the direction wrong. Here, see, follow the finger, and write in there two things. One is a Y or N, yes, no, for if you've seen any of our previous trainings before. So if you were with us in person previously, put yes. If you weren't, no. And then also tell us what you had for breakfast. So I'm going to write yes because I have been to San Antonio. It's one of our favorite places to go, and I just had coffee so far. Okay, oh, great. So some familiar faces here. You know, there's also, I should put out there, our two chat pods. We want to use the really big one that's underneath the slides today if you can. It'll just make it a little bit easier for everyone to see the chat. Oh, I'm seeing lots of familiar names. This is great. Okay, good. Yes, enjoy your breakfast while watching Renee and I talk about mobile health. Dinner and a show. Pop-Tarts! Oh, my gosh. Okay, actually, I'm jealous. That sounds really good. I'm guessing we're all reacting to this pandemic in different ways. Some of us with Pop-Tarts, or maybe that's your normal breakfast, and I shouldn't give you a shade there. Okay, so it does seem like some of you have seen some of our curriculum before. Others, this is totally new. Well, for those of you who have seen our in-person presentations, we're doing some different things this time, so don't just put us on mute. We are going to be talking about updated research. We're going to be giving lots of more general tips related to using mobile health in practice. It's not just a repeat of previous times, but I do want to throw out there the big elephant in the room is we are in our living rooms. This has been a strange thing. Fortunately, her team and especially have been amazing in helping us get ready to do this in a very short amount of time. But there's going to be hiccups. That said, one of the very small slivers of silver lining here is that I did want us to move to a virtual system into the future anyway, not all the time. I still want to be able to come down and do some face-to-face presentations. But we're hoping we can do these in a virtual platform so that in the future, instead of just helping 30 or 40 providers at a time, we can be helping unlimited amount of providers, especially when there's emergent news to share or training. For example, we're preparing trainings right now related to telehealth to help with the COVID-19 crisis. So, as such, you are becoming our guinea pigs, and I greatly appreciate that. It means there's going to be hiccups. Renee is probably going to have some cats walk on screen at some point, which is not nearly as disturbing as my children and dogs, which also are going to come on screen at some point. I've told my kids that once an hour they're allowed to come in, wave at the camera, and then leave. Unfortunately, the dogs don't speak English yet, so we'll see how well that works.
And the cats don't listen.
So and the cats don't listen.
I've told them many times.
They speak English. They just don't care. So at any rate, thank you for your patience. But as we're doing all this, we beg, please let us know how we can be improving. Your feedback would be tremendous so that next time when we can plan ahead to do one of these, we can use your feedback to make it even better. At the very end today, we're going to send you a link for literally a 2-minute survey. That was the average amount of time it took folks to fill it out yesterday. It's like 3 or 4 questions just to help us understand what we could do better. Okay, so that was a lot of preamble. I'm seeing lots of healthy breakfasts. So why don't we go ahead and get started? Okay, so we are going to be talking for about 4 hours today, and it's about using mobile health in clinical care. Look around, find your bathroom, find your exit. Also, we sent you lots of information beforehand, including some specific apps to download. But everything we sent you is also right below my head here in the Files pod. I recommend that you take a minute and at least download our slide deck. I know it's a big resource. Just in case we have any Adobe Connect failures today, since we're all on the phone line, we will keep talking. You'll still be able to hear us, but just in case the Adobe Connect platform goes down, yesterday, probably around 8 or 9 Pacific, we started to notice it slowing down a bit, probably because so many people in the world right now are using Adobe. So please download those. And then 2 boxes down beneath the Files pod is another pod called Web Links, and that has just a lot of good resources. We'll be referring to some of those later as well. Okay, anytime you have questions, put them in the chat pod. Renee and I are really lucky. We've got a fantastic team standing by. Lisa Hutchins has been sending you information. Ms. Hutchins is available to answer any questions. She's our technical guru on Adobe Connect. We've also got Ms. Suzanne Williams, who's our program manager, who is able to help connect folks with additional resources. And you'll see both of them in the chat pod. So please, see, Suzanne is happy to help. Let's test her out. There are some hard ones. Okay, and let's see. CE credits, that we'll talk about that at the very end. Essentially, at the end of the day, or at the end of this 4 hours, you're going to go to the link we're going to provide, or you may already have this in your email, to the CPO website. That's the DHA's Continuing Education Program Office. And there you'll see some disclaimer stuff. You'll rate us, give us some feedback. Please give us feedback. We really do use that to improve. And you'll be able to take a short quiz to get your 4 CEs and download your certificate. Okay, who is Connected Health? Why are we doing this stuff today? All right, DHA Connected Health is the part of DHA responsible for not just helping make innovative tech products, but also actually getting them used. So in the DHA and VA, we invest quite a bit of money into innovative technology. And what we've seen is that generally our patients are right on board for using it. Sometimes it takes our care teams a couple more beats to get on board. So that's part of what we do is in the education and training team is help train care teams like yourselves to make sure you're aware of how to safely use the health technology that we're investing in the federal government. DHA Connected Health, we also do a lot of other things, like we do policy work, we do research, we help with requirements gathering to make sure that the technology we're making or buying in the DHA fits with care team needs. So there's a lot of other things that we're involved in. You might see our names pop up here and there. If you're ever curious about DHA Connected Health or how we can be assisting you, please do let us know. A little bit later, I think it's in Dr. Kavanaugh's section, we'll be talking about how we also do independent reviews of health technology for off-the-shelf stuff, not just things made by DOD. So anyway, just get in touch with us. Oh, thanks, Lisa. So Lisa just put in there the link for registering and taking the quiz on the CPO site. So even if you haven't formally registered for this course today, if you want your certificate, please go there. If you don't care about the CEs, for some reason, if you're not a provider who needs CEs, it's still helpful to us if you go there because we get your feedback. But again, share any feedback with us in any mode possible. Okay, I'm on slide 3. Disclosures, Dr. Kavanaugh and I are not making any additional money on this beyond our civilian pay. We are not suggesting that you go buy anything private sector. In fact, one of the things you're going to see is we're very, very careful to only recommend apps, websites, podcasts, other health technology made in the federal government or purchased by the federal government. That's part of our role as government representatives. But the thing is that we'll all acknowledge that there is a lot of phenomenal tech tools out there made in the private sector. Unfortunately, what we've seen is that it can be overwhelming, right? There's so many mobile apps for any particular area. So one of the things we've been working on at DHA Connected Health is making sure that we can help you sort through some of the private sector apps as well. Although we won't say, oh, go out and buy app X, or this is a great one to recommend to your patients, we can, if there's a topic area that DoD and VA do not yet have apps for, we can do an independent review to help narrow down the field of it. But as we're talking about these things, feel free to mention other apps you all have used. I do think there's some really phenomenal ones out there. Okay, learning objectives. We're going to talk about a lot of good things today. We're going to start with just what is mobile health? Why is it helpful? What are the barriers to it too? Because it's not one size fits all. It's not perfect. We'll talk about how to safely and ethically use mobile health tools and other health technology with our patients. We'll talk about some common medical conditions with which we can help address symptoms and tracking with mobile health tools. We're going to talk about how to actually prescribe these tools, and we'll identify security, privacy concerns. We'll also talk about ethics and culture, too. Now, I know this sounds like a lot, and 4 hours might seem like a long time, but each one of these topics is something any of us could easily talk about all day. Our team is busy developing additional tools that can be used to help go into even more depth beyond these trainings. And we're hoping to be able to get CEs attached to those as well for some of them that are longer. For some of our shorter things, we're making little videos and other kinds of learning tools. So if there's something that you need more in-depth information on that we're not able to share today, please let us know. We're happy to answer questions today, of course, as we can. And if we can't, we'll take those questions and use them to make our other trainings even better. Lots going on today. This shows one break in the middle. Given the circumstances here, we're probably going to take 2, maybe even 3 breaks, more, I guess, if depending on cat and child-human needs. During our break time, our phenomenal operator, Melissa, today is going to play music, so that'll be a little cue for you. When there's music playing, it means we're still on break. When the music stops, come on back. Okay, so another 2-part question for you. I'd like to hear in the chat pod, yes or no, yes, are you using apps with patients or other mobile health tools? I know I haven't defined that yet. We'll get to it. Are you using apps with patients? Yes, no. Comma, if so, what is the last app or apps you prescribed? Oh, wow, this is great. Oh, thanks, Suzanne. Terrific. Mm-hmm. Wow, so I'm seeing a lot of DoD and VA apps, a lot of the ones that you'll hear us mention today, and also some other interesting ones. I saw Calm, I saw MyFitnessPal, 2 other really good private sector apps. For those of you using Calm, how do you use that with patients since it has a paywall? Do you just use the free aspect of it, or let's see, using Calm? Dr. Luna. And forgive me if I'm not using your titles correctly. I'm just seeing what you put in the chat pod here. So please do forgive me if you're uniformed personnel and I'm calling you doctor, or if you're not doctor and I'm calling you doctor. But J. Luna, how are you doing, Calm? I'm interested in maybe if San Antonio buys a license for your patients.
It looks like they're using the extended trial, they said.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't.
No worries.
Sorry. Apparently, I need to get better at multitasking. Thanks, Renee. Oh, that is cool. There's an extended trial you can give patients. One of the things we're looking to do in the DoD, we're not quite there yet. It's a policy issue more than a tech issue. It's figure out how we can buy an enterprise license for some apps, such as that one. There's also an excellent weight loss app I would love for us to be able to provide to our beneficiaries. We don't like the idea of developing our own app when excellent materials already exist. It's not a good use of taxpayer money. But at the same time, we haven't quite figured out how to get an enterprise license and then deliver it to both our service members and their beneficiaries and their dependents. So it's something that I'm hoping we can figure that one out soon. We're getting a lot of good requests for that. But that extended trial sounds really good. Again, there's so many great resources out there. One of the problems we hear from our providers in these trainings is that how do we figure them out? The ones that we're going to talk about today that we made in the DoD and VA are excellent in that they are made by experts. They are very safe and secure, but they're not always the be-all, end-all app, and I'll be the first one to admit that. Okay, so this is excellent to see. I'm not sure if I saw any ends on this. Seems like everyone, at least who's still participating and hasn't just gone off to play outside, is already using mobile apps in practice. And so, therefore, please weigh in as we're talking about how to actually use these with tips and tricks that you've learned, and also mistakes you've made, things that went wrong. I think those kinds of stories are always the most instructive. I'll be sharing some of mine later. Unfortunately, I've had a lot of those, but that's how we learn, right? Okay, so what is mobile health? I've used this term a few times. Mobile health is something many of you are already doing. So first of all, how many of, if you can, a few of you or more in the chat pod, tell me how you woke up this morning. How did you wake up? What kind of alarm did you use? Well, Erin Morrison didn't need an alarm. Impressive. Cat on my head. Okay. Smartwatch. Nice. Phone. Ooh. Sonos music alarm. That sounds fancy. I like that. All right. So, in other words, most of us use one of these. That's common. It's probably the predominant way that our patients are also waking up in the morning, and that means that the very first thing they are touching is their phone. Many of us, we don't just press alarm off and get up about our day. Usually we start engaging with the phone. It also means for many folks this is the last thing they touch at night as well. We rarely have this away from us. And although that can be a disturbing fact, and I think one of the things we'll talk about later is tech overuse, which is another area that we've got some other materials on if you're interested in going into it with us. I think we can all recognize that if it's a problem, it's also an opportunity and something we can leverage because our patients do have their phones with them all the time. So not only are we using these things to help us wake up and to communicate with each other, we're also using it to help our health. So mobile health is the use of any kind of mobile device, whether it's a phone, a computer, a wearable, podcast, to help us engage in our health. So consider, if you will, a one of your members of your household comes to you with a very strange-looking rash, okay? You're not familiar with this one, doesn't look like eczema, looks a little bizarre, you're not sure what it is. What's the first thing you do? Please put in the chat pod. Panic! Oh my gosh. Bridget, you would have a really hard time in my household. It seems like every day there's some disgusting new symptom of something going on. Being it. Yeah, most of us are going to go to Dr. Google, I think, unless you're a dermatologist. I don't think we had any dermatologists today. Or if your partner is a dermatologist, maybe you'd start there. But usually with any odd health symptom, unless someone's hit an artery, right, we start with Google. We very rarely go immediately to the emergency department. I think hypochondria is rising dramatically right now. I know my partner, every time he coughs the littlest bit, immediately thinks it's COVID-19 and is, again, Googling the symptoms of that. Dr. Google is the main way that people first start. So let's say we look at some pictures of disgusting rashes, try to match them up to our child who's been playing outside, and we're not panicking, right, Bridget? And then we probably compare it to other pictures on Google, right? We terrifyingly go to the image tab, which is never fun. And we might even take a picture of our own child's rash to watch it progressively over the next couple of days to see if it goes away, to see if any hydrocortisone helps, or to send that picture to your provider. We still aren't going to go to the emergency department. We will probably call a nurse consulting line. Maybe we'll talk to a care team virtually, especially right nowadays. I think care teams are very willing to look at pictures of rashes instead of having us come in. Then maybe if it doesn't go away, we eventually come in. Your provider might recommend, hey, there's a good website. Just go here, go to the Mayo Clinic, and or go to health.mil and see the advice. There are some at-home symptoms that you can check there. And ultimately, if it doesn't go away, come in. And all of those are ways of using mobile health. First, using Dr. Google on your phone or on your computer, mobile health. Taking pictures of symptoms to track on your own, mobile health. Using a nurse consulting line, technically telehealth, mobile health, definitions out. But the point is that we're already doing this. It comes to us naturally at this point, and so are our patients. They're used to using their device to track things like weight, steps, weightlifting, what we're eating. And so taking that one step further in terms of how can I also use this technology to help them track behavioral health symptoms, medical symptoms, to help with education, to help monitor between sessions, or to help with maintenance of treatment gains. It all makes sense. And it's not a weird, unfamiliar thing to our patients. This is quite natural. In fact, and I'll return to this analog throughout the day, I always like to use the analog of a book. For many of us, especially during our training, we were taught, here's like the 3 books that you'll use for your patients. Here's a good one for PTSD. Here's a good one for misbehaving children. Here's a good one for whatever other, maybe it's sleep, whatever the health symptoms are that you were learning about during medical school, during your PhD programs, any kind of training. And I remember writing down diligently my clinical supervisor's favorite books, and those were the ones I bought. And then I would make copies of those chapters to hand out to my patients. Because I like to read, some of us might be nerds, woohoo. But for our patients, maybe a book chapter is hitting the mark and maybe it's not. So although that model of giving someone a book chapter, copy out some worksheets may work for some patients, these days we're seeing that doing those same kinds of activities, but on a mobile device or on a website or even listening to it in a podcast is going to be preferable. These things aren't one size fits all. But this is the most important thing I'm going to say today. Don't want to speak for Dr. Kavanaugh because she'll probably say much more important things, but the most important message I want to get across to everyone is technology is not the treatment. Okay, the technology we're talking about today, technology is not the treatment. In the DHA, in the VA, we used evidence-based practice to deliver excellent care. And then we can also use technology to help us deliver that care. But it doesn't change the care. It doesn't change the treatment plan. It doesn't change our modality. For example, if we're treating someone with post-traumatic stress disorder and we consult with the patient and we agree prolonged exposure is the right solution, PE Coach, an app that helps with the homework assignments, isn't the treatment. The treatment is the evidence-based BOA et al. Prolonged exposure. We have choices for our patients. They can use the original paper handouts. They can make recordings for their imaginal exposures, or we can use Prolonged Exposure Coach to do it in a mobile platform. Doesn't change the treatment. Technology is not the treatment. And I think once we start thinking about it from that perspective, it helps us as care teams get more in line with this idea of we're not asking our patients to do a weird thing by downloading an app like you see it in this picture here. It's still the same evidence-based treatment, but in a different method that may be more palatable, may be easier for them to stick with. And for some of our patients, the book's going to be better. Technology isn't for everybody, right? And we can't make that assumption, which we'll talk about more later. Okay, so let's talk about some of the benefits and some of the barriers for actually using mobile health in practice. So one thing I wanted to point out is that, well, first of all, this data I'm about to discuss is pretty old. I think we collected this in 2016. It still holds true a little bit, but this is a bit outdated, okay? So, for example, a few years ago, 89% of service members owned a smartphone. I think that is much higher. In fact, other than a handful, I think it's very, very common. We saw a majority owning an Android for our service members, and the majority of the folks we were surveying were 30 and below. Our providers, on the other hand, many more owned a smartphone at that time, and a majority owned an iPhone. And majority were 34 and older of the ones we were surveying there. So let me ask you, why am I making a big deal about the Android iOS difference here? Why does that matter? And I'm sorry, let me ask that in a different way. Why do you think, and this part's still true, why do you think providers are more likely to own iPhones and our service members maybe than non-provider service members more likely to own Androids? And I'll say, even though we don't have this updated information, we do still see younger folks, E1s through E7s, still more likely to have Androids. And us older folks, officers, more likely to have iPhones. So why is this? Seeing expense, wage gap. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Androids are cheaper. You can certainly buy a really fancy Android that's just as much as an iPhone, but in general, they're much less expensive. There's other reasons, too. If you've used iPhones before, I won't call you all out to see, are you an Android or an iOS user? One of the really nice things about iPhones, especially back in the day, 2016 when we were Androids used to have better camera functioning until iPhone recently caught up. That's a good point, Renee. Yeah. Those of us who care a lot about photography, that's one of the main reasons I use my phone. So I got I almost disclosed the name brand of my phone. And as a government employee, I shouldn't admit that. If anyone wants to know my awesome phone later, I'll let you know. Yeah, camera functioning. But the thing about iPhones is that they all follow the same user interface. So no matter what iPhone you picked up, if you went from an iPhone 2, an iPhone 3, an iPhone 4, it still felt and operated the same way. And for those of us who are a little bit older, that was a really attractive feature because it meant no matter which iPhone you picked up, you knew how to use it. Whereas with Android, there could be a bit of a learning curve with each maker creating a different kind of user interface. That said, we're seeing with time Android and iOS becoming more and more similar to the point where now there are still some differences. For example, do you shift up to get the menu? Do you shift down? A few things like that. But in general, the shift from using one platform to the other isn't that big of a deal. But it's still tricky. What happens when have you ever picked up a phone from the other platform? It can be really difficult. So why is this important for us as providers? Any thoughts on why as providers we should be aware of this Android-iOS difference? Put it in the chat pod if you've got a sense of anything that might make a difference as a provider or as part of a care team to understand Android and iOS when you're using apps in clinical practice. Thanks, Jason. You can reach more patients. Yeah, absolutely. Disseminate guidance faster if you know their system. It's so true, especially, we'll give an example later of where things can get a little clunky when you don't know their system. We don't expect everyone to be able to shift up and back between Android and iOS, but it's good to at least have the experience of picking up the other phone once in a while and trying to use it so you can see how it is different or how it's the same. One reason is because if you're recommending a specific app, it's possible that the app could look a little different based on whether it's Android or iOS. And your patient could show you, for example, Virtual Hope Box and say, hey, can you show me again how to do this? And you might look at it, and even though it's an app you've used regularly, if it's on a different system, you might not immediately know how to do it. The other thing, and this is something I've seen less frequently lately, but I like to put it out there. I used to see providers refer to their phones as iPhones, but in the same way that we refer to facial tissue as Kleenex. I know there's a word for this, but when you take like the brand name for something and just call the entire product that, if anyone can think of this grammatical term, please put it in the chat pod because I've been trying to think of it for like 24 hours. So anyway, just the same way we say, oh, hand me a Kleenex, I'd see providers say, oh, and then I ask the patient to put it on their iPhone or to grab their iPhone or see if they're interested in using an iPhone. And that can be a small barrier, especially since, as we mentioned before, wage gap is a big reason why folks might be going with an Android instead of an iPhone. It's a small thing, but I think it could be significant when we're talking to our patients and we're saying something that could be a little bit off-putting. So I always like to encourage people to talk about it as a smartphone. Don't use eponym. Oh, my gosh. Erin, thank you. Appreciate it. I'm going to sound so smart next time. Thank you very much. Okay. So anyway, it's important to know. We'll get into some more examples later. Also, hey, Lisa or Suzanne, can you do me a favor and put the link in the chat pod of our Android iOS comparison video from YouTube to play during the break for folks? Oh, no, he asked Jeeves and he binged it. He certainly didn't go to Dr. Google for that. I'm sure he'd do it automatically. Anyway, we have a cute video starring these two characters you see here that explains some of the iOS Android differences. I'm pretty sure we've got that on YouTube. I don't want you to watch it now because I don't want you to miss anything, but during a break later, it would be a good thing. Okay, so those of you who are currently using apps, why are you doing this? What is the benefit here? And don't worry, I'm going to also talk about some of the barriers. I'm not just trying to say apps are amazing, everyone should use them. But for those, or as Suzanne put it, which is much more succinct, for those of you already utilizing mobile health, what is a benefit? Why? Why is this helpful? And we'll get to barriers soon. Okay, I'm seeing behavior tracking, access to information, more immediate buy-in and interest in the treatment itself. That's very interesting that maybe it sounds like a more real, legit kind of treatment if it's coming in this platform. Behavior tracking, psychoeducation, tools to use outside of session. Yeah, for sure. For some of our patients, they're more likely to use them than traditional handouts and other resources. The self-monitoring, right? Huge. Being able to build that insight, talk about engagement, dedicated app. That's a good point. I think it's always easier to go to a website than to take the time to download an app, but having it dedicated means they can't lose that link. A very, very good point. The homework, yes, assignments, worksheets getting lost. That never happened to my patients. Just kidding, every time. Yes, and we will get to cons because there's a lot of them, but that's a great one. The difficulty to navigate for those who aren't tech savvy. Yep. Yeah, this is terrific. This is, the next couple of slides show other benefits we've seen from the data, but I think you all pretty much hit on these. It supplements care, helps overcome some of the barriers to accessing care, especially geographic distance, time, distance, accessibility, compliance, and engagement. By the way, all of our references are available at the end of this deck. Also, one of the files in our files pod here is the 10 megabyte one. It's the U.S. Department of Defense Mobile Health Practice Guide. It has a really great lit review as well. I think our references in this presentation are slightly more updated. But, you know, we're not just saying this. This isn't just from our experience. There is a wealth of literature backing this up, which we'll get into a little bit more. The efficiency of care, I think, is interesting. And it's a little counterintuitive, too, because it's an investment. You know, one of the barriers is always it takes time to recommend an app and to explain it. But what we're seeing ultimately, at least played out in the research, is that ultimately it does create efficiencies down the road. Case management for geographically dispersed patients, that's huge. We're seeing in the DoD a RAND study just came out saying for specialty care and for behavioral health, there are a lot of disadvantages for folks living 50 miles or more away from a military treatment facility. And so having better telehealth options and mobile health options can help decrease that disparity. Extend health beyond face. Yep, you guys said that too. So we're all seeing these excellent benefits. And, you know, the iTunes App Store just came out in 2010. So we're talking about just 10 years here that this has been common practice, or maybe not common practice, 10 years that this has existed, and maybe a couple years of being common practice. And so the literature is growing more and more every day, which is helpful. You know, we're all scientists, practitioners. we in the DoD and VA, we only do evidence-based care, right? So if I'm not seeing research behind it, I don't want to do it. And so I think this helps a lot compared to when we were doing these kinds of presentations 6-7 years ago. Clinicians, though, are not quite on board yet. In general, we see our patients ready to go, and the data backs that up, too, that patients are more likely to want to engage with mobile health tools. Providers, it takes us a little bit longer. Unfortunately, for many of us, if it wasn't part of our training, it doesn't exist. But also, I think we're highly discriminating in a good way, meaning, I should use a different word. We're highly, okay, Aaron Morrison, what's another good word for me to use? We're highly, we make sure that something has the research behind it. We make sure that it's going to truly help our care before we ask our patients to do something. We do see a majority of providers using mobile devices, but most of it's for staff communication, some for patient communication by means of secure messaging, and of course using patient portal, et cetera. But the big barriers we're seeing so far are worried about HIPAA, huge, and oh no, I just noticed a typo. Sorry guys, I'll point it out later. And 21% don't have the time. Okay. Whoa, talk about distracted. Gosh, I think I need some more coffee to be focused. Okay. We're seeing improvements to not just behavioral health, but primary care as well. The big one being patient safety, of course. That's going to always be our most important factor. Also helps our diagnostic ability, but on the patient side, increasing patient adherence as well, which fits into patient safety. I think that's the big push within the DHA. I know whenever I hear Dr. Quartz in medical affairs speak, that's always his bottom line, is patient safety. Okay, it's not all unicorns and roses, though. What are some of the barriers impacting provider adoption? Either barriers to your own use or ones you've seen in your clinic or from what's stopping you? Oh, or Suzanne, based on your experiences, what is the biggest barrier to utilizing mHealth in your practice? Poorly developed apps. Yeah. Unfortunately, some of ours are very dated, but of course, in private sector as well, I don't mean to put DHA on blast. Many of ours are amazing, but you know, some of them were created several years ago. Lack of familiarity and comfort with apps. Absolutely. As a provider, we wouldn't recommend a book unless we'd read it. Same thing with apps. We're not going to recommend an app unless we really understand it. Not just understand how to use it, but understand the research behind it. Absolutely, Kaylee, that is a key issue. It takes very little time with regards to research time to make mobile health apps compared to the time it takes to do a randomized control trial. I mean, especially if you start including, like, let's get some grant funding, right? Let's go through the IRB. Let's do this trial. And then following the trial, let's try to get it published. I mean, by the time all that's done, the app isn't even used anymore. We've seen a lot of difficulty with that in our shop. These are really good. Not my copy. I meant your comments. Your comments are really good. The coffee's okay. Some people don't want to use an app. Yep. You know what? That's a really, really important reminder. I said the most important thing I'm going to say today is technology is not the treatment. The second most important thing I'm going to say, I promise I'm not also going to have a third and fourth. The second most important thing is that technology is not for everybody, right? For some people, it hits the mark. For others, not so much. And if we want patient engagement, we have to go where the patient is, and that means having options. Yeah, patients are going to pay attention to the ratings on the site. That's a really good point, that these days when they're downloading apps, they are thinking about it as a consumer, not just my doctor told me to download something and so I'm going to go do it right now. If they see a low rating on the App Store, a lot of times that's a big red flag, and they don't want to put that on their personally owned device. Great point. Oh, my gosh, an app for expedited IRBs. Okay. Kaylee, later we'll partner up on that as like a side hustle, and we will totally get rich. Gosh, yeah. Perfect. After the COVID-19 pandemic is over, then we'll come up with our side hustles. Until then, let's just all concentrate on keeping kids away from sharps and keeping our marriages going, et cetera. Okay, so we're seeing a lot of barriers. I think there's other barriers too that I haven't seen mentioned yet that we'll come to on the other slides that are just logistic ones as well. For example, for those of you who are using apps in treatment, do you have them downloaded in your clinic? I know that for many folks, Wi-Fi in clinics is a big barrier as well. Interested in how you do that. When you're actually recommending an app, how do you ask them to download it? In session. Okay, so in session, oh, good. In the office, yeah, that's probably the best approach in general. It can be tricky if they're relying on their data. Some services spotty. Yeah, some patients aren't going to want to use the data on their devices. Others will be fine with that. If you have Wi-Fi in the office, great, but yeah, spotty. Oh, okay, showing how to use the app from their own phone. I think that's very common. If I had a magic wand, I would make it so that every single clinic had lots of tablets with all the apps that you like to recommend downloaded on them so you can hand them to patients and they can use it themselves. But unfortunately, that's not possible yet. Okay, these are barriers we've seen in previous workshops, which can be summarized into a few of these. This is different from some of the ones you all have mentioned, and I think in part because all of you seem to be early adopters. Everyone earlier said, yes, they're already using apps. The ones we've seen previously are not knowing what to do, basically, maybe being a little bit stuck in tradition or too busy. Of course, we're not seeing that with all of you. You are integrating it already. Not knowing how, I think, is a big one. The security and privacy concern, that's always huge, especially every time Facebook is in the news or Google's in the news for data security issues. That makes our jobs a little bit harder in that we have to start answering those questions. And unclear about policies regarding their use. We're working on a DHAPI, which stands for DHA Procedural Instruction, to help give uniform guidance throughout the DHA on the use of mobile health tools, but that is still in progress. Okay, evidence regarding barriers. The literature's backing up what everyone else said. The behavioral health providers, at least, I'm a psychologist, we lag behind our patients. And the technology at the treatment facilities aren't quite there to support it yet, meaning, a lot of us are in the position of using our own personal phone to show patients what we're talking about. It would be nice if we had the logistics to back it up. What clinicians have requested is that it fits within their existing IT, that we can make sure that the privacy for every app is assured. That it could be linked to the electronic health record, that would be amazing, and that it can link to billing and reimbursement. That's especially an issue for telehealth. Okay, so most of you, I think maybe all of you, are already utilizing mobile health, but how often? We're going to do a quick poll here just to get a good sense of whether this is something you're doing very frequently or almost never. Okay, so weekly, frequently. In general, we're seeing a pretty clear trend there to this is something that happens pretty quickly, or pretty frequently for you all. That's helpful. In general, it seems like most of you are already on the bandwagon here, understanding that the research is showing some benefits here. I'm not just making this up, the research is backing us up here, but there are some barriers inherent in the adoption. And we're hoping that we can help you overcome some of those today, or at least address ways that your clinic can get on board and catch up with you. Also, really understanding the patient's perspective is going to be so helpful. Understanding how long they've been using an iPhone or an Android. Understanding that for them, if they're seeing, like we saw the comment before, if we're seeing before that it's got a low rating on the Google Play, they're probably not going to want to download it. Next, we're going to get into some best practices for integrating mobile health into clinical practice. But before we do this, please recap after. Okay. Sorry, Lisa, I'll do that in the future. Okay, so before we get into this next area, I want to take just a quick 5-minute break. We'll take a longer break later. And operator, if you could go ahead and play the music for us during this. It is 8:53. Well, actually, why don't we just come back on the hour? Let's come back on the hour, and we'll get started with talking about some practical tips for using mobile health in clinical practice.
Ma'am, you may continue.
Thank you so much. Welcome back, everyone. You came back. Hooray. Okay. So now we're going to get into some more practical tips. In general, the way we'd like to think about actually integrating any kind of health technology, whether it's mobile apps, telehealth, wearables, etc., is first making sure of the evidence base. Next, talking about clinical integration and security and privacy. That's what we're going to talk about in this section. Also, ethical issues and cultural considerations. We'll be talking about that a little bit later. So, as I mentioned, right now we're talking about how to actually introduce and prescribe apps. Those of you who are already introducing apps into practice, it sounds like most of you are doing it in the session. Do you use any handouts? Do you just show it on your phone? I know one person said they show it on their phone. How else, in the chat pod, how else are you actually bringing the apps into your workflow? Demonstrating how to use the app so you've got it on your phone makes sense. Oh, I like that. Asking if is there anything they're already using, and is that helpful? That's fantastic. Ditto. You can wave once an hour if you want. Over here. A little more. A little more. Okay, perfect. Okay. We're a couple hours behind you here, but the household has started waking up. Okay, so anyway, there's so many different ways to do this, and there's no one right answer. In an ideal world, I think all of our administrative staff would already be trained on how to help with some of this as well, so that if we have a patient who's already been recommended or prescribed to use an app, just like in primary care, how an admin staff can help make sure that they're getting prescriptions filled, that they can also make sure that they're getting their mobile health prescriptions filled. Some of the general guidance here. each clinic is unique, so we do recommend that you take some time to think about this, perhaps as a team, and to make sure that the workflow does support the patient access. But then there's also lots of questions you should be considering when bringing apps into your clinical workflow. Whoops. So, for example, my recommendation is always to have it, if it needs to just be you do this on your own. But in an ideal world, have a committee in your clinic or on your treatment team come up with a list of the predominant disorders that your clinic treats. So let's say you predominantly, I know in the real world we have about 20 disorders that we're predominantly treating. But let's say, for the sake of discussion, that your clinic is seeing an uptick in substance abuse disorders and domestic violence. Okay, those two, unfortunately, can go hand in hand. So your team then considers, all right, so for these two treatment areas, we want to come up with a list of resources that we can vet beforehand. So in other words, we don't want a situation where providers are, in the moment, having to think off the top of their head, wait, what's a good app I should recommend? Or what's a good podcast? Now, different patients are going to like different modalities. We talked about before. The second most important thing I'm going to say, technology is not for everyone. So what I like to do is come up with a sheet of vetted resources. In other words, for our patients who like to read, here's the book chapter, or here's the 2 book chapters we like for this treatment area. For our patients who like podcasts, maybe they already commute and love podcasts, here's the podcast that we know is created by experts, and we've already listened to it and vetted it. For our patients who are using mobile apps and who are comfortable with using an app to supplement their care, here's the 2 or 3 apps that we like that we've already investigated. We'll get to security and privacy in a little bit. We've already assured ourselves of the security and privacy there. And then we have these handouts available, ready, already printed, already in electronic format, so we can send it to our patients. And when you have new providers join your practice, this is part of their onboarding. Yes, in our practice, we decided these are the main, you can come up with additional resources if you want. These are ones we've vetted. We know they're from a trusted source. We know they have good security and privacy. We know they're evidence-based. The same way you might do with your book chapters, again, my favorite analog here, you wouldn't want to recommend a book without reading it. Same with these apps. Instead of asking your providers or yourself to become an expert on 1,000 different apps, just the ones that you vetted that you decided, yeah, these are the main fantastic ones. So know how to use those 2 or 3 apps very, very well. And then once a year, you update your list. And that's something we can help you with too, especially if it's a unique treatment area. We can help you do a scan of the literature to see if, or a market review analysis to see if there's something else. And in that way, again, I know magic wand, who has time for committee work? But it's that investment that ultimately this will create efficiencies down the road. Okay, so let's talk about security and privacy issues. This is a hugely important area, and I know that in today's session, we're not going to get into the details of every single one of these very well, but because it's so important, we're creating an additional interactive tool that we're hoping to be able to put online within the next month or 2, pending public affairs approval. So we can keep you posted there. You can catch up with us on our community of practice, joining with your email address. You can get updates. But at any rate, here's 3, like the bottom line 3 things to know to make sure that you're safely using mobile health tools. There's, of course, so much beyond this, but the 3 main things. 1, make sure the tech is from a trusted source. Now, in general, when we are using tools developed in the DoD and VA, we can trust those sources. We can trust them for mobile health tools in that we know that they are developed to the highest levels of security. I've seen the code for the DoD apps. I know that The data, once on the device, doesn't go anywhere. We'll get into that more a little bit later. When something's from a trusted source, you can be sure that what they're telling you in the marketplace descriptions is accurate. But what I always recommend is if you're using a private sector app, or even one developed by university, or one that's been developed by contractors for a university or private sector, make sure you're really looking at where is this coming from. There are apps made by foreign entities that are probably not ones that we as government representatives want to be recommending to our patients. Further, many apps are going to ask your patients to buy things. That's something, doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad app. There's lots of fantastic apps you mentioned earlier that do have a paywall. Doesn't mean that the free portion isn't good. Some of those are phenomenal, but it's something to know ahead of time. Further, every single app has a website available. You can't post something onto Lisa, why don't you put that in the regular chat pod for everyone? That would be awesome. You can't post something onto the app stores without also giving a website that describes you. So you can always check that way. Now, that sounds like a lot of work, right? It is. That's why it's always easiest to go with one of the DoD or VA apps. Thank you. Here's some much more in-depth advice that we love. This is of all the websites we've reviewed that have security and safety information, this one that Lisa just added is absolutely our favorite. So for those of you who are interested in going more in-depth and don't want to wait a month for our interactive module, here's some excellent information. Thank you so much, Lisa. Okay,
sorry, Julie. I'm just going to pop in.
Yeah, go for it.
That link is also really helpful if you have patients who have questions, because it kind of answers a lot of the most common questions about using mobile health. Over.
Absolutely. And your patients are going to ask you questions. So it's good to be familiar with this. Oh, thanks, Lisa. That's great. Okay, she already sent this to you. By the way, turns out YouTube is now blocked for DoD temporarily while we are experiencing increased bandwidth with all of us working from home and sheltering in place. So we're not able to send out or even look up the link right now to our Android versus iOS video. We'll try to get that to you in the future. Okay, so speaking of understanding things, the next aspect is permissions. Permissions are those little things that pop up in the window when you're downloading an app for the first time. It will say something like, Virtual Hostbox requests full network access. Do you agree? Virtual Hostbox requests X, Y, and Z. These are permissions, and it's an excellent way of helping customers to the Google Play and iOS, iTunes Store, App Store, have a better awareness of what the apps are doing to their devices. That said, it sounds super nefarious, and so at times your patients are going to ask you about it, especially since our service members, we want our service members to be very security-minded. And so accordingly, if they say, hey, you told me download Virtual Hostbox, and it's saying it needs access to all of my contacts, we want you to be in a position where if it's an app you're recommending, you're able to assure them, yes, when it says all of your contacts, that's because there is an option in this app to be able to set up an emergency contact list. When it asks for full network access, that's because it is going to link to YouTube so that you can put links to your favorite panda videos to help you feel good when you're down. Again, that's a lot of work, right? It would be impossible for us to understand the permissions for every single app out there. That's why scoping it down, narrowing it down to a handful that you feel really confident in, that you can learn the permissions, makes a lot of sense. Okay, and passcode protection. So this is such a minor thing, but it's so important. Right now, if you do not have a passcode on your device, please stop listening and just go do that right now. Like, that's so much more important. Put a passcode on your device. Make it so that other people can't just pick up your phone and use it. Same for your patients. One of the benefits of the DoD and VA app is that the data doesn't go anywhere. And that means that if I fill out my mood log on T2 Mood Tracker, which is one of our DoD apps, that lives on my device. There's no way to send that information anywhere. If I lose my device, I lose all the data, which is a huge downside, but it makes it much more secure. And it's a choice we deliberately made in the DoD and the VA as well. That said, if you don't have a password on your phone, then anyone can get into it. So that's not good. We want to make sure. Actually, I take that back. I think T2 Mood Tracker has its own password there as well. Make sure you've got a password on your phone. It can be a really easy thing that your kids could do. I want my kids to be able to get into my phone, my personal phone, so that they can make emergency calls if needed. So I made it very, very easy for them. But still put one on there. At a minimum, it prevents butt dials.
Julie, I just want to jump in and kind of say something about the passwords. I just want to remind people that there's some of the apps, like I'm pretty sure PE Coach 2 has a password protection option, and some of the other apps are starting to roll out passwords. So that's just something to be aware of. That's another way you can kind of protect your data and your privacy and your patient's privacy with them. So that's all I wanted to jump in and say. Over.
Thank you for jumping in. It gives me a break to drink more coffee. Please interrupt as many times as you want. Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing that more and more in VA apps, and especially our DoD apps. We've been asked by our CIO to implement password protection for anything that has protected health information. Again, kind of annoying from the user perspective, but also great from the security perspective. And when you're using an app, and many of us also recommend apps made in private, hard. Many of us also recommend apps made in the private sector. We can't make those promises for those, so it's important to look into it. T2 Mood Tracker and Virtual Hope Box, both password protected, makes sense. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't speak to this slide. So this is a lot of information. You can get more information about every single one of these on that link above from healthit.gov, and this will be in our increased training, our additional training, but this is something that we can provide you some more information on if you're interested in outside of this time, or at the end of the day today. If we have extra time, we can go through some of these. Each one of these areas is very important. And that said, you don't need to be an expert on it. We're hoping to get you someplace between, I recommend apps and complete expert, right? Just someplace so that you can be an expert on the specific apps you're recommending. An expert, you don't need to be able to read code, but expert at least to understand what is the real safety here? What is the security of this data? When a patient puts data into this device, where is it going? Because they're going to ask you that as well. Okay, just some bottom line reminders here. Only download apps from trusted sources. Use a passcode. Pay attention to the permissions. Know how the data is going to be shared with providers. So this is a tricky thing. With our DoD and VA apps, again, there isn't a way to send that data to us providers or us as researchers. Again, from a user perspective, that's a bit of a downside, but it's a deliberate choice we made to make these extra secure. So if someone's using a virtual hope box, you don't have to worry about them trying to send you that data, which then becomes subject to HIPAA. Instead, it's clunky, but they're going to bring their phone with them to session, and they can show you a T2 Mood Tracker graph. They can show you their CBTI data, downside and upside. But something to be aware of is that many of the private sector apps do have export options. So what might happen, and we'll get into this a little bit later in our ethics section, but it's important, so let's double down on it. Preparing your patients ahead of time with understanding of how not to send you data, because email is never secure, okay? Email is never secure. especially if it's linked to a Gmail address. For example, if they're an Android user, downloaded an app from Google Play, it's likely attached to their Gmail account, and that's not secure. We don't want anyone sending us protected health information through email. That's what secure messaging is for. And so because the app, especially if it's an app you're recommending, has an export option, your patient may misunderstand and may think that you want them to send you that data. And frankly, as practitioners, we want to see that data, right? It's hard to have that data there and not see it. But resist. You don't want to be the holder of that HIPAA-protected information. That just opens a can of worms. Okay, know how to protect the data on your device, especially if you are sharing your phone with your patients to show them demonstrations. For DoD and VA apps, remember that we have no access to the data. For VA apps, there are ways to enable external metrics. It looks like we are having a bit of technical difficulty. So let me just do a quick status check before I get back to my monologue. Can you hear me and can you see me? Oh, woo! Okay, great. Alert. Okay. Good. I will try to stay professional in this webcam. It's so hard to see yourself when you're doing these things. All I can concentrate on is this one piece of hair that no matter how much I try to adjust it, is just like, no. Okay, first world problems. Okay, thank you. You can see me. Congratulations. I'm very sorry that you have to look at me this whole time. But hopefully Dr. Kavanaugh will be back soon. At least she's still on the line. We can't see her. Okay, for DoD, VA apps, we can't access your data. For VA apps, it's important to know that they can enable, oh, she's here, great. They can enable metric tracking, meaning the VA can have access to how many people are currently using the apps, what kinds of problems the apps are having, but it's still aggregated. It's not down to an individual level. But people will ask you, what does this mean, enable metrics? That said, it's not 100% confidential. When you go to a website, you can use a private browser to make it confidential. That said, for apps, if you download an app from iTunes or you download an app from Google Play, Google and Apple know who has downloaded what app. So it's inaccurate to say to your patients, this is 100% private, no one will ever know you have this app. Essentially, it is, but that's not really accurate. I mean, is Google going to share that, hey, Sergeant so-and-so downloaded Virtual HopeBox? Unlikely. But that data is known, and we want to be accurate. That said, it is accurate that their chain of command will not know that they're downloading an app to help monitor PTSD symptoms. And I think that's much more relevant. But still, we want to be accurate. So when we're talking about any app, if they're downloading it from Google Play or iTunes, Google Play knows they've downloaded the app. That's it. We don't get any information. Their chain of command certainly doesn't get any information. And for DoD apps, the user has control over the data. It's on the phone, and that's where it stays until they lose their phone. Or they wipe the phone. A good reminder, too, I think Renee would chime in with this one if I forget, is that it's always important to enable the where's my iPhone option if you're an iTunes user, or if you're an iOS user, or if you're an Android user, it's automatically enabled so that you can always go and wipe your phone if it's stolen or missing for too long, and then you can always reload it once you find your device.
It's also really helpful if you lose your phone, you can kind of lock it, and it puts, at least for the iPhone, it'll put the number to contact you at on the screen, so whoever finds it,
oh, that's cool.
They're a good Samaritan can call you. So
I like
it's
that.
a way to kind of keep the remote access and control over your device when it's not in your physical control. Over.
That's great. So, Renee, Dr. Kavanaugh, are you able to come back? We're going to do some role play. Yay, there she is. Dr. Kavanaugh, everyone. Welcome. Hooray, hooray. Oh, wait. Okay.
Good morning. Sorry.
So, we're going to do some incredible acting for you all this morning. Normally, we would role play this. Some of the actions are physical actions, so you'll just have to go with us into the land of imagination and pretend we're sitting next to each other. But what we're going to do is pretend to be a provider and patient. I'm going to be the provider, and Dr. Kavanaugh here is going to be the patient who's pretending that she is coming in for treatment of PTSD. And we've already spoken about different treatment options, and we've agreed that prolonged exposure is going to be the best fit for her. And so once that's decided, this scene here begins. Renee, do you want to add anything before we start?
Nope.
Your cat is like climbing on the wall behind you. I love it so much. Do you want to come say hi before I concentrate? I have another child who's going to say hi. Okay, cat, child. Excellent. Great. Oh, thank you. And also I have a cardboard Millennium Falcon he made me, which is like my new favorite toy ever. Okay. Thank you. You may return in an hour. Okay. Sorry about that, everyone. Yay, working from home. We're all learning so much. Okay. So, Renee, we talked about prolonged exposure. So the next step of this is I want you to download an app called PE Coach. Okay, Prolonged Exposure Coach. Just look for it in the App Store under PE Coach. Let me know if you find it.
So it's just PE Coach?
Yeah,
Coach?
PE Coach. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I think I found it. Oh.
Okay, great. Okay, now download it and let's open that.
Okay.
Yep.
So is this it?
Okay. Oh, yeah, here. Yeah, now click open.
Uh-huh.
Okay, now let me hand it.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay, so what I want to show you, this is the end license user agreement. I'm just going to click OK on this because it's fine. It's made by the DoD. Okay, so what we're going to do first is go to the homework section because that's, like we were talking about, that's a really important part. Your phone turned off. Can you turn it on again for me? Okay, thanks. Okay, so we're going to click on homework, and every week you're going to, the button, yours is weird. Hold on. It turned off again. Can you? Okay, thanks. Got it. All right, so now see here, we're clicking on homework, and here you're going to see your recording. This is where we're going to keep all of your recordings and stuff. And every week you're going to go in, hold on. Oh, my gosh, is that pictures of your kids? They're so cute. Can you get me back to the app? I clicked the wrong thing. Okay, thanks. All right, so now that's how you just go from homework to homework, and we'll figure it out, and every week we'll review this together, and I'll be able to see your data, and it should be no problem, okay? Do you have any questions? Here you go. All right, so that was our ideal situation. I'm just kidding. That wasn't ideal. Please tell us in the comments. Oh, can we share? Noah, one of our participants asked if we can share instructions for making the Millennium Falcon. I'll have him during homeschool later make an instructable video for you, sir. Okay. Anyway, please let us know in the comments what wasn't amazing in that little scenario there. I guess we just did perfectly because there's not a lot of comments yet. More guidance on the using the app, navigating it initially. Yep. It's dismissive. Or maybe it means Renee was dismissive and I was great. Stay with me. Yeah. Why the app could be helpful. Good. Touch their phone. Oh, yeah, right? These are disgusting now, whether it's COVID-19 or not. Yes. It's such a struggle to demonstrate on their phone if you're unfamiliar with it. You can sit if you want. Commenting on her pictures. Yeah, that's a little bit intrusive, right? Oh, my gosh, the professional boundaries, right? Yep. Love that. Dr. Rogers, having them use their phone while you're doing it with on yours, that's definitely an ideal situation.
And I think a good reminder for everybody is when we're using our own devices to put them in airplane mode, because that will prevent any, or do not disturb mode if you have it. It'll prevent any unnecessary pop-ups or notifications coming up when you are having a patient demonstrate on your phone or demonstrate to a patient on your phone.
Such a good point. Nothing like having your mom call you while you're treating your patient, right? Let's go right from the beginning. Other than that, we are amazing Oscar-worthy actors. Happened to you several.
I speak from experience, too. Yeah, that was definitely something
right.
I learned. It's like, oh.
Or I guess it could be even worse if it's a text message and they're seeing, how's the rash? I mean, I don't know. Sorry for all my rash examples today. Yeah. It could be much, much worse. So sometimes, do not disturb mode can be disabled. So learning more about your own device if you're going to be using it in this way could be really important. From the very beginning, my second most important thing I'm going to say several more times is not every patient wants to use technology. Technology is not for everyone. Someone mentioned this earlier, finding out are they even interested in using this technology. So understanding what are the options. Technology can be great for patient engagement. It's not for everybody. So letting them, I forget who said it, it was a great comment, understanding why this could be helpful and letting them have some say in the decision is probably the biggest thing that we did that wasn't great. Just jumping in and commanding, download this app now, do it. Then after that, I got in her space and grabbed her phone from her, demanded that phone. And many of our patients, are going to think hierarchically, and if we say, give me your phone, they're going to hand over their phone, even though that's not a normal thing to do. But in the moment, it might seem normal. So not great. We don't want to take someone's personal device and just demand it. These are expensive, and for some of our beneficiaries, it could be one of the most expensive things they own. Also, filled with personal information, right? All those boundary issues were just incredibly intrusive. Suzanne pointed out, the next thing I did was I accepted the permissions for her, and I accepted her end user license agreement. Not great. We want to allow them the choices here. We know that if it's, prolonged exposure coach made by the VA, that happens to be a very secure app. But they don't know that, and we want to make sure that we're giving them that background information. Also, if you've looked into PE Coach, it would be nice to say, yep, in a study it showed that using this app actually increased the ease of this treatment, helps keep people on it longer. All very important information to help with that buy-in. Let's see. Next, I had problems navigating her phone. She had a different system than I did. PE Coach is one of those apps where it operates slightly differently on Android and iOS. I wasn't ready for that. Called her phone weird because clearly it wasn't my fault. It's all her phone's fault. Trying to think of other things. I just went through it way too fast, right? It does take time, especially prolonged exposure treatment. I mean, there's a lot of details there for those of us who are PE providers. It's not something you want to just breeze through. Sure, the app is pretty easy to use once you understand the methods for homework, but this is a patient who's about to engage in, frankly, a pretty difficult treatment, and I'm handling it way too blasé and dismissively, I think, as Suzanne said before. She's probably a little worried about what is this treatment going to entail, and me just saying, oh, download this app, do this, do that, it'll be fine. Not good enough. You have any questions? It's almost like, please don't ask me any questions because I don't want to answer them. Just take your phone back and nod and do the things. None of that is great. Can't remember, did I give her options? I did not give her options. Oh, sorry, Renee.
Oh, sorry. And I was just going to comment, coming from putting myself in the place of a patient, it felt like it was very quick, and I don't think I would be able to, it was hard to follow along, so I don't think I would be able to follow the instructions after I got home, especially if I was already kind of like, we just did an intake or an emotionally laden session. That would be a lot of information to kind of add on top without kind of slower instructions and having me navigate over.
Great point. Yeah, let's talk all about your trauma. Oh, and here's an app. I'm going to really quickly take you through this app. Yeah, not ideal. Now, here's the background on our lovely demonstration. All the mistakes, errors, and judgment that you just saw are things that we've done in real life, not necessarily Renee and myself. I'll leave Renee out of this. She's the ideal. But several years ago when we were first developing Prolonged Exposure Coach, we did a study to see how does Prolonged Exposure Coach rate compared to just using the paper products, and what happens if you include a virtual reality component in addition. Bottom line, virtual reality didn't add much, but patients did like using the actual app, and it increased adherence. But as part of this, we had a lot of providers and researchers from our team doing the actual administration of prolonged exposure treatment. These are all scientist practitioners, and these are all people who helped make the app, very tech-savvy providers, early adopters here, doing the treatment, explaining the app. And we didn't prepare ahead of time. We didn't role play exactly how are we going to introduce the app, how are you going to explain the app. I think we just had the assumption that it would mirror what we do in regular clinical practice doing PE, and that most of it would be able to just do on the fly because we're the really tech-savvy providers, right? Unfortunately, during practice, we realized a lot of us were wanting to grab the patient's phone or getting in their personal space or wanting to speed through the instructions. And I think in the moment, folks knew, oh, this is not good. But it was that first instinct. So any of you who've ever given tech support to someone else, we know logically the best way to help someone with technology is to have them do it themselves, but it takes longer. And so, you know, when Carrie's mom is texting him about his rash, then also needing help getting onto Facebook, it's always easier to just say, oh, just click here, just click there, when in fact it's much easier and better in the long run to have them do it themselves. So all of these were real mistakes we've made, and I'm sure it hasn't been completely ideal for some of you who have started this. We hope that by seeing us act this out, it helps raise some awareness. That said, it's hard to have the perfect scenario, right? Again, if I had that magic wand, we'd all have separate tablets so we could be demonstrating everything while our patients are also going through it. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Like Dr. Rogers said, having the patients using their own phone while he mirrors it on his seems like a really good solution. There's no one right way to do this, but we recommend as you come up with better tips to help others. I also think, even though it's very old-fashioned, having things written on paper as a handout is helpful. Also as a PDF, so you can send them the document later that just says, here's the app, here's where to get it, here's what it does, you know, that, or sending them the link to the Google Play Store if they're an Android user, sending them the link to the App Store on iTunes or on iOS if they're an Apple user. Those kinds of things can also help as well.
And Julie,
yeah.
this is where the prescription pads come in really handy. The prescription pads are great because it has the image of the app. And so this way they can match what they see on the image of the prescription that you give them with what they're looking at in the App Store over.
Such a good point. The prescription pad, we're going to see a screenshot of it in a bit, but it is available in the Files pod below Renee's head down here. We recommend using that. I use it all the time. We can also send you printable copies or printed copies in like a pad form, so you can just, do, oh my goodness, words. So you can just rip it off, give a prescription, and hand that off. Email us. We'll send you whatever you need. Okay. Some of the, I'm on slide 31 now. Is that the slide y'all are seeing? This is about the time yesterday when we started to have some problems. Okay, excellent. Great. Thank you. If you start to see any weird lags or anything, just let us know in the chat pod and we'll problem solve that. So this is just going to describe some of the resources we've got down in the Files pod. This is available. Beth, I think, has physical printed copies of these, but you also can download the digital copy. It has just a ton of excellent information about how to implement mobile health. This is a chart we just recently updated that gives a sense of some of the DoD and VA apps that align with common health conditions. And, can you let her out? That's also available in the Files pod, and we can also send you printed copies of this on nice paper to hand out to folks. It's a nice, convenient way to find good tech. Here's the prescription pad Dr. Kavanaugh was mentioning. Couple things to mention. One is it's got, like she said, all the pictures so that when they do go to the App Store later, they can recognize, oh, yeah, that's the icon I saw in my provider's office. But also, very important is pay attention to that instructions box down there. We wrote in the part where it says frequency and use. It doesn't say that on the real thing. But it's important to add that in as you're prescribing something. On the one hand, it shows that you're thinking about it. You're not just saying, oh, go use this app, whatever. It shows, I want you to use T2 Mood Tracker. Let's discuss the best time. You can help them get a reminder for it. Give them the frequency and the use so that, especially if they're of an obsessive nature, they're not using it too much. We don't want folks overdoing it. That said, it's also important for you to follow up the next time you see them. Just like with any homework assignment that you give a patient, we want to follow up. It's respectful, and also we'll keep them continuing to use the tools if they recognize that you're going to ask about it. So I do always fill in frequency or use, and that's also a space you can put additional resources if there's something else that's not on this prescription pad that you'd like to recommend. For example, one of those private sector apps that some of you mentioned earlier, write it in here. And again, this is, and on the other side, it has podcasts and websites. Here's a couple more resources. This one has a little bit more information, especially about some of our resources for kids and adolescents. Oh, thanks, Lisa. So, most patients don't fully understand prescription differences. Oh, that is a really good point. Yep. I think, it could be a little misleading to call it a prescription since psychologists and others don't have prescription privileges. So, I think if that makes sense to take a few seconds and explain, this isn't a medical prescription. This is just how we are prescribing your use of this technology. That makes sense. I think patient by patient, that conversation could probably go a little differently, but that's a good idea. Podcast. Can I see a quick why and how many of you listen to podcasts? Wow, a lot of podcast listeners. Okay, so this sample of folks we just polled listens slightly more than most people do. Pew data from about a year and a half ago says about 25% of people regularly listen to podcasts, with 40% occasionally. I'm a huge podcast listener myself. Those of us who do listen tend to listen on our commutes and also while doing chores or work that doesn't require our ears but does require our hands. So in other words, I love listening to podcasts on cooking or walking the dogs, etc. So podcasts are terrific for people who like them. For people who have not started listening to podcasts yet, it's probably not going to sound very exciting to them to listen to something about health information. That said, we've seen some good success with podcasts, and we're going to continue making them in the DoD and VA because it's a relatively efficient, low-cost, high return on investment way to get our messages out, to get health information out, especially for patients who already listen to podcasts. It goes back to the technology is not going to be for everyone. When you come up with your vetted list of resources, for example, for sleep, my hope is you would have at least one podcast on there for patients who already love podcasts. For example, here's 4 podcasts we've produced at DHA Connected Health. A Better Night's Sleep is probably the best one of all of these, although we just saw an article this morning about military meditation coach because it's being used more now during COVID-19 pandemic. A Better Night's Sleep won the the People's Choice Podcast Award for Health in 2019, and it's basically just interviews with DoD health experts on improving sleep and answering listener questions. And the first few episodes are about CBTI. But the point of this is that it's not the only way to get this information. For some patients, using CBTI Coach to get the education is going to be better. Of course, CBTI Coach is a fantastic app. But in addition, for someone who also likes podcasts, I think A Better Night's Sleep makes a good addition. For folks who don't listen to podcasts at all, they're probably not going to want to follow up on a recommendation like this. But it's still something to be aware of, that we're getting more and more of these. Next Generation Behavioral Health is one that I made along with Dr. Christy Armstrong, who some of you might recognize that name if you were in previous training. She's now with the VA, so she can't join us anymore on these, but you can still hear her melodious voice on Next Generation Behavioral Health. Those are just 10-minute episodes that essentially go through a lot of the same curriculum we're discussing today, although a little bit more in depth. And we have now figured out a way to give CEs for listening to podcasts. So we're going to be doing a lot more of these in the future. So if you're interested in testing that system out, you're able to get 1 CE for listening to an hour of Next Generation Behavioral Health episodes as well. We can give you more information on that, or if you go to the podcast itself, you can get the info. At any rate, it's good to know about these. It's another valuable method for disseminating health information, especially in terms of maintenance gains. Living Beyond Pain is for pain management, and each episode has a different topic area, with the underlying theme being how to manage pain flare-ups. So that's certainly, if you're seeing a lot of pain management patients, that's something to know about. Military Meditation Coach is essentially 40 different versions of how to meditate or how to do meditation or relaxation in all sorts of different styles and shapes so that our patients can find one that they like. Okay, takeaways here. Understanding the 5 competencies, and that these aren't different competencies than what we already do when we've got a patient. We still do treatment planning. We still look at all the available resources that are going to be helpful to them. The fact that we're adding technology doesn't change the fact that we're still making sure things are evidence-based, that we can integrate it clinically, that security and privacy exist, that we're following ethical issues and cultural considerations, which we'll get into more a little bit later. Understanding all the clinical support tools that exist, and understanding privacy and security issues. Okay, before we get on to that, I would like to just ask if there are any questions or things we should follow up before I turn things over to Dr. Cavanaugh. Okay, So, Dr. Kavanaugh, I will turn things over to you, and whenever you, oh, someone's texting there. Okay. Dr. Kavanaugh, whenever you're ready, if you want to take a break soon, we could do that as well, or we could get started and take a break later. It's totally up to you.
How are people feeling? Do you guys need a break, or should we power through? This section's about 20 minutes, and then there's another. Okay. Another press through for 20. Okay, great. So we'll take a break after this stress. Awesome. So on your screen, you'll see a polling question, if you don't mind answering that first before I dive in. It's just good to see what people are seeing in their practices and how familiar these problems are. All right. Any last polling responses? Going once, going twice. So it looks like most of you are very frequently seeing stress-related conditions. Yeah, around over 80% it looks like. So yeah, Lisa, we're going to move to the next slide. And so, here we go. So some causes of stress, it can be from a lot of places. Pandemic, moving, physical stress. These can all add up. And then there are the additional stressors that our service members deal with, which can be pretty unique, such as deployment, the frequent moves. Sorry, I think I've got a hot mic on the presenter line. And so when you're dealing with stress, there's a few ways you can deal with it. You can either go to stress management, which is managing your stress in a healthy way, meditation, exercise, or maladaptive approaches, which have their own consequences. Oh, no worries, Shirley. And so we want to help our patients and clients really focus on the healthier, more beneficial ways to minimize the effects of maladaptive methods. What are some maladaptive methods of coping with stress that you guys are seeing down in San Antonio? Substance misuse, yeah. Yeah. Avoidance, yeah. And sometimes that substance use and avoidance sometimes goes hand in hand, right? Like, I don't want to think about it. Hostility, yeah. Irritability. Yeah, and pornography, so ways of escaping reality and avoidance, really. Overworking, yeah. And video games. Yeah, so some of them, you know, this is a good time to talk about maybe maladaptive technology, and like how much tech is too much. And it's really when technology becomes a problem, just when pornography or substance use becomes a problem. When it is interfering, when we go back to the DSM definition, it's causing significant distress and it's causing significant problems. There's an impact, and that impact isn't outweighing the use. So they're continuing to play video games despite its impact on their sleep schedule or their health. So they know that these video games, they're playing too late, and so they're tired the next morning, and that kind of has the cumulative effect. and so they're not changing their behaviors. So that's a good way to kind of, frame technology, maladaptive technology use. And so going back to maladaptive stress, these ways of avoidance, of distancing, of escaping are all pretty unhealthy because the stressor is still there. And so we want people to really focus on how to manage it, acknowledge it, and deal with it. So moving on to the next slide. Because we know that stress can impact a person kind of holistically. My background is in health psychology, so this is kind of where my bread and butter. But stress can have an impact on your mind, your recall, your ability to input information into your memory, and your ability to extract information out of your memory, and your body. When our stress levels are at a chronically high rate, your body's response is in that fight or flight state, and so your HPA axis gets overstimulated. Cortisol is kind of constantly pumping. So there are effects of that too on your health and body. Relationships. So if you're hostile, you're using alcohol and pornography and overworking as a way to escape the stress or avoid it, the people around you might be impacted as well. And also, another area where stress can impact is on the mission. So it can impact readiness, our ability to deploy, to be present in the moment, and carry things out. And so moving on to the next slide. So Dr. Kinnan mentioned this function a little bit earlier. So this is what a visual diagram of what the market research team does when they are searching for an app that's publicly available. So they go out to the Google Store and iStore, in the App Store, the iStore, and they look for the search term. So here it's stress, and so then they use different criteria to exclude apps based on, the specific client identified criteria. So you can see how it kind of narrows the funnel down. And after they narrow the funnel down to top 10, they have developed a mobile app rating inventory to help objectively evaluate apps. So this table just shows you what the scores are, the different subscales in that inventory, and how the app scored. And so this kind of at least narrows the field down of what apps might be good to try out when you're searching. And the market research team is available for any of the providers within the DHA, and tongue-tied. We can give you information on how to use that resource towards the end. You can just give us an email and we'll connect you with the right people. But, starting with our own app, Breathe to Relax, is really good at teaching stress management. So we know that diaphragmatic breathing is a great way to help patients manage stress, pain, anxiety. And so this tool is really wonderful because it teaches patients really how to do diaphragmatic breathing. And when we did a study to see, potentially if we use this app instead of having clinicians teach diaphragmatic breathing, how much could we save? And you can see that it's over $2 million is the estimate. And, we don't want to replace providers with an app, but it's, for me, when I was in primary care, if I was seeing a patient one time, I could teach them how to do diaphragmatic breathing in session in the, sometimes 20 minutes that I had, but then I could also recommend them to use this app at home. And they would have instructions and have a guided tutorial too. And so, somebody with my slides. And so the key features that I really want to highlight in this, it gives a how-to guide, which I have found really helpful, stress education. So it tells the patients how the impact that stress has on their body and kind of the holistic approach. And And it also has a customizable breathing tool. So you can customize the in-breath, out-breath, and pause, as well as if you're working with someone who is hearing impaired, it does the closed captioning for the how-to guide as well. So that's always good to know. How do you make our apps adaptable? What's a good way to navigate that? So moving on to the next slide. And so the other tool that's really great for stress management could be the efficacy of Teaching Mood Tracker. And so this can really help patients understand, their stress level and maybe relationship to stress and how they could be related, or, track their stress level and their alcohol use over time. So what's great about Teaching Mood Tracker, it's got some pre-populated scales with depression, PTSD, and it also has customizable scales, which I found really helpful because it helps patients track their feelings in the moment, so they're not having to recall in your office, how did I feel at Tuesday when I was upset about that fight? They can track it in the moment, and then they can track the other things that we want patients to sometimes make the connection to. So with the stress as the example, a lot of people saw alcohol misuse. So that would be something to say. So as you're stressed, you can have the patient measure your stress and also measure their alcohol use, and these are customizable scales, so it's really open. During one training, a provider mentioned that they were using Teaching Mood Tracker to measure someone's ambivalence about being in the service. And so they could see how their mood and how they were feeling about their commitment changed over time. So this is a really adaptable, customizable tool. You can see here, you can rate the symptoms, customizable, and it also shows patients their graph and feeling over time, which I always think is helpful. It gives that visual representation of progress. Sometimes it can feel like I'm doing so much and I'm not getting better. But then if you look, yes, there's been maybe some ups and downs, but the overall trend is moving in one direction or another. So again, another thing that's really neat is that it's now linking with Fitbit, which is anybody doing any primary care psychology or like health focused or working with patients with pain? Yeah, okay, great. Awesome. Wonderful. So I wish they had the Fitbit part when I was still doing primary care and doing a chronic pain group, because this would have been so helpful with tracking, pacing, and pain rating symptoms. So having patients, rate their functionality, rate their pain scale, and look at how that mapped onto the Fitbit. So there are really great ways to leverage these and customize them. Does it link with wearables? I'm not sure, Julie. Is it linking with the iWatch wearables?
We previously had that functionality, and it no longer does. At this point, it's just Fitbit.
Anyway, but there's still ways that you can have them track their time. If they're tracking their steps from their iWatch, they can input that at the end of the day or in the notes of a scale, so how much activity you do, and just really help reinforce a lot of those lessons. So moving on to the next slide, we also have Life Armor for Stress, and I feel like this one's a really helpful tool to help people gain some understanding, like, is this a problem? Because it has so many self-assessments, and also it gives some pretty good coping tools. So it helps really kind of start the conversation of, oh, can I manage this? Am I dealing with this okay? People, sometimes in primary care, you get the people that are really ambivalent about mental health and behavioral health treatment. So this might be a way to just kind of say, hey, it sounds like right now treatment isn't for you, but if you're ever looking at ways to kind of see if, how you're doing, and if you need to come back, Life Armor might be a good way to kind of do like a wellness checkpoint, kind of like a thermometer. And so since it has so many self-assessments, it's really helpful that way. And then we also have Mindfulness Coach, which is now my favorite app. So my background is in mindfulness-based intervention, so I was really excited to see this beautiful revamp. So it just got a facelift, and now it has a lot more meditations. So we know what meditation is effective for. I think it's effective for most things studies have shown. It's such a wide variety and has such a strong body of literature. But what's great about the Mindfulness Coach is that it has, the 12 audio-guided tours or exercises, but they're not all sitting. So sometimes they're just mindful in the moment. There's a mindful eating exercise. There's a mindful walking. And for patients who are like, oh, meditation is not for me, I always find that the active mindfulness, where you're not sitting, can you mindfully wash your dishes? Can you mindfully eat? Can you apply this present moment awareness to other areas instead of just paying attention to how your body feels? Because that might be hard, especially for some of our chronic pain and trauma survivors. Their bodies don't often feel safe or a good place to go. So sometimes that movement can help. Pay attention to the holistic moment. And then it also has tracking, so it shows how you're doing. And it does the tracking really in a fun way. So it has a tree, and as you're using the app, the tree grows and blossoms. So it's a really nice reinforcement that way. It also has a mindfulness assessment. And again, all of our apps will have a support and crisis all of them have a support and crisis. And so we're going to skip some of the activities because these are left over from the in-person treatment. And so before we move on to, I just want to see, there's someone over here. Oh, yes, I'll call the other chat pod. I wanted to make sure we weren't missing anybody. Yeah. And so let's take a 10-minute break.
Hello, everybody. So, quick note. First of all, welcome back. Reminder that audio is only available through the phone line today. We are not providing audio through Adobe Connect due to bandwidth issues. Okay, so we are now going to talk about ethics and cultural issues. Hopefully everyone's got that caffeine ready. An important topic. And not always sounding the most exciting. Oh, I guess you want my video started. Okay, not always sounding the most exciting, but I promise we'll make it interesting. Before we get into it, though, what are some of the ethical situations that you have seen, or maybe the ones that you fear? Give me your worst nightmares here. Maybe not the worst nightmares. Give me your semi-realistic ethical nightmares here, or considerations that you want us to be able to respond to. Or as Suzanne said, what ethical challenges have you experienced or could envision while using mHealth? Okay, Renee, I'm dying to know. Is that a real thing that's happened, or is that your nightmare scenario matching on a dating website?
It happened with a professor. So.
Oh my gosh. Oh man.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like navigating this new world where so much of our lives are online, like how do we parse them off?
Right. I mean, I guess like the analog, like in the 90s, I could see like going into a bar or something. I don't know how real people, I met my husband on Match.com. So and at the bar seeing your professor, right? I mean, that still a possibility, but it just feels so much weirder on a dating website.
Yeah, or even a client. Do people have any worries about patients or clients emailing them, or Facebook or Instagram, or other social media platforms, or just other concerns beyond dating problems?
Yeah. Okay, well, data security, huge. Very good. Yep. Clarifying when technology is not instead of treatment. Like, now that you've got this great app, I still want you to come to your appointment. Excellent point. That's a huge one that Anne just put. Keeping the communications limited to the clinical settings and approved venues, not through email or other virtual space. We're going to be repeating this point later on a slide, but since that one just came up, we may as well address that one right now because I think it's huge. And this is where prevention is worth a pound of cure, which is warning our patients always, whether or not we're using mobile health tools in practice, reminding them that email is not secure and that to contact you, here are the correct ways. Here's the phone number for the clinic. Here's secure messaging. And every patient, that being part of our general workflow whenever we have a new patient. We hear this question a lot, and it's always possible for our patients to look us up on Global and get our Outlook email address and email us, and we need to prevent that. Prevention is also really helpful with the social media aspect. I'm on social media. Part of my job is, keeping up to date with Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and even TikTok. All of those things I'm on and constantly using because I need to monitor what we're doing out there on our channels. I don't want my patients connecting with me. How many of you, put in the chat pod, how many of you have had an intrusion from a patient on social media? Like a friend request, someone tweeting at you, anything like that? Yep. Yeah, that's not great, right? I always say in a first session that I'm on social media, but I never connect with patients, so please don't friend me. And I always hear, oh, I would never send you a friend request. No, they would. They would absolutely send a friend request. Of course, once you say it out loud, then it strikes them that, oh, yeah, that's not the thing to do. Just like if I tell them if I see you in the mall, I will nod, but I'm not going to come over and say hi. Same thing on social media. And addressing it ahead of time, first of all, prevents those intrusions, but second of all, makes it less rejecting if you reject their friend request, because we do not want to do that. So same thing with email. Letting them know ahead of time, because once that comes to you, then it's covered by HIPAA. So let's avoid that at all costs if we can. Okay, so the ethical situations I want to make sure we return to, keeping communications limited, concerns about data security, not seeing any others. If you have other ethical concerns, do let us know. We're going to be addressing some, of course, but I want to make sure that at the end of this training you feel like we've addressed any questions you have about ethics. The bottom line for ethics is pretty easy, which is that the way we address ethics when using health technology is the same ways that we address ethics always. There are not separate ethical guidelines specifically for technology in any of our disciplines yet. I'm sure they'll come soon, but in terms of using mobile health, it fits into our existing ways of talking about ethics and our competencies, which we'll get to in a little bit. So again, always have that analog in the back of your mind. If we were talking about a book chapter or a telephone call, how would we address it? So let me give you some examples. And again, if you've got more questions, please put them in the chat pod. Okay, so Renee and I are both psychologists, and many of you today are psychologists or follow the APA ethical standards. But these are also really consistent for social workers and other disciplines as well. In general, our health technology used still fits into these same general areas. For example, fidelity and responsibility, making sure that when we deliver care, it is evidence-based, and that we're sticking to it correctly. Same kind of thing. If I'm doing prolonged exposure treatment for PTSD, it's prolonged exposure treatment. If I'm additionally using the PE coach in addition, then I still have the same responsibilities to be delivering my care correctly. Integrity and respect for people's rights and dignity. This is where we get a little bit more into some of the finer nuances in terms of competence, making sure that if I'm using health technology, that I understand how to use it, that I am actually competent to deliver that care. For example, back to prolonged exposure, you need to have a training in prolonged exposure in order to deliver that treatment. Just having the app doesn't release us from the need to also understand prolonged exposure. Human relations, that's where we get into some of the boundary crossing issues. And again, prevention there, being aware of how our use of tech may influence the way our patients are reaching out to us, especially when we're talking about using a private sector app that has the ability to link to others. We want to make sure that our patients aren't sending us documents, aren't sending us Facebook posts, aren't tweeting at us. Privacy and confidentiality goes back. See, a lot of this is repeating what we've talked about before, which is good. Privacy and confidentiality, going back to making sure your patients understand the limits to how these technologies can secure their privacy and confidentiality. What is private? What is confidential? And finally, assessment. This is maybe not the most common use of health technology, but we do have ethical standards regarding assessment, which is we don't just do an assessment for our own knowledge or for our research. If we're going to do an assessment with a patient, we need to actually use that data. Same with these apps. If we're asking someone to use CBT-I Coach, for example, Cognitive Behavioral Therapy for Insomnia Coach, an excellent app that it seems like many of you are already using, we wouldn't want to ask our patients to go through the different assessments in there and then never return to them. Or we wouldn't want to just look at that and make a note in our patient record. We want to actually help them. I'm going to stop here. Looks like we're getting a comment. Nope. Oh, my gosh, there's crazy noises outside. It's just a garbage truck. Nothing big. Any considerations for use of apps with groups if apps have contacts and sharing functions? We'll talk about this a little bit more later when we talk about Virtual Hope Box, but we do use Virtual Hope Box as part of group treatment in some of our groups at Joint Base Lewis McChord at Madigan Army Medical Center. And fortunately, Virtual Hope Box doesn't have the opportunity to share the data. It does have an opportunity to set up contacts, though. So we explicitly say, don't include each other in the contacts there. That's interesting, though. I'm curious about others of you. Have you used any apps in groups? And if so, how do you work with this? Oh, maybe I've misunderstood the question. Please do clarify, ma'am. But what do you all think about this question? Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Okay, so, yeah, MyFitnessPal, same with Noom and some of these other excellent apps, and we know if it's a behavior change app, having that social function is huge. And that's why many of these apps also, like Runkeeper, after you finish a run, you can post to social media how great your run was and show the map. And those are excellent features for maintaining those behavior gains. But if it's a mental health app, or even if it's one of those other apps, that's a tricky area. I'm interested in Renee's thoughts, too. Right off the cuff here, I would not recommend outwardly that someone do this unless it is something as innocuous as MyFitnessPal or Runkeeper, but I would also let them know the limitations of this. One is, of course, the privacy. The other is we don't know how supportive their social network is. And it's also possible that you could be unintentionally setting them up to receive some criticism. For example, we have no control over whether there's going to be a hater in their social network who's going to say, oh, you're following your diet, about time, or something else that's going to have a negative effect. I know that's unlikely, and in general, if someone posts a run from Runkeeper, they're going to get some nice feedback. I happen to be an extremely slow runner / jogger / shambler, and I'm sure my brothers would love to poke fun at me for it. I can take it. I'm not sure that all my patients could. So I don't know. I think it's a tricky thing. In general, and that's why an app like Noom or MyFitnessPal, where you can set up a curated group of friends, can be really useful, because then it's folks who also are in the program are also doing the same thing with similar goals. But for these apps that have the social network functionality of just posting it, tweeting it, putting it on Facebook, there can be some difficulties there. Not everyone has a positive social group standing by to cheer them on. I'm interested, though. Renee, did you want to add?
Oh, yes. I think kind of just was going to echo what you said. I think it really depends on what are they sharing and what is the group. I wouldn't want to do this with a trauma group, but a smoking cessation group, maybe. I think, yeah, if you can curate the group or have the friends, like everyone in that's doing the group, create like a friend circle. I'm not sure how that works on MyFitnessPal, or where it can just be the group members encouraging each other, because we know that that actually is one of the benefits, that they can, that support of, you know, from their network or from that group where they're all doing each other, or where they can communicate, being like, hey, I had a hard day. How do you guys manage, you know, going out to a birthday party? Yeah, I think, yeah, definitely try to play around with it and see if you can, how that works. And this is just with any app, really. Playing around with it, exploring it, getting a good feel for the in and out before, will help you when you're working with a client, too. But, yeah, this is a good question.
Just add, I would certainly not put yourselves in the group, because then it's subject to HIPAA. So it's tricky. Also, you know, back to nightmare scenarios, what if someone indicates suicidality and you're seeing it as a text message as part of a group in MyFitnessPal? I mean, I know it's unlikely, but it puts you in jeopardy there. So I would stay out of that group situation. Any other thoughts on that? Yeah. In an ideal world, the DoD would create excellent resources where we can be connected in a secure system. We did a pilot with Tatrick to take T2 Mood Tracker and put it in a secure messaging type platform called MCare, and it worked okay, but it's still clunky. And frankly, this is one of those areas where private sector just has far outpaced us, but still doesn't answer those safety questions. Great considerations, and I think this is one of those things where having others to talk to about the safety concerns is necessary. You know, if you find yourselves with these kinds of questions in the future, please reach out to us, and if we don't have the question, we'll research it. We like hearing these questions. It helps us develop more materials so that we're staying up to date with you all. In previous years, the kinds of questions we would get, 6-7 years ago is, how do I download an app to my computer? Clearly, we are beyond that phase of the question. We're much more into these nuances, and it's terrific. I'm loving the questions we're getting. Okay, competency. This is tricky because for many of us, the use of health technology wasn't part of our training. We don't have a regular method for maintaining competency. So our suggestions are, one, doing what you're doing today, taking trainings like this. Following up with us, you can join our community of practice by sending us email, or in that 2-minute survey we're going to do at the end today. We'll also have an opportunity for you to sign up for community practice so we can send you updates when we have new resources. But also there's, in leveraging some of the materials that we have available in this pod, and we can send you all sorts of tools and physical copies if you'd like. But practicing, getting in there, building that technological competence. I don't expect you all to be able to master every single app and platform. That would be unrealistic. There's thousands of new health apps every single day. But back to my recommendation earlier, where you and your clinic, you decide, okay, these are the 3 health conditions that we're going to develop a one-page flyer that here's our favorite apps, our favorite book chapters, our favorite podcasts, and our favorite web links that we've already vetted. Master those ones. Get to the point where if someone says, oh, does that app have this function, that yes or no, it does. That level of mastery. You don't need to be able to read the code, but have a good understanding of who made it. Is it evidence-based? What are the limitations of it? And, we never want to come across as salespeople. It's good to admit the limitations, too. In addition, is it great to read tech blogs and catch up on other innovative technology? Absolutely, sure. But I don't think that's essential. But the final note here on this slide, at least, is one that's important anytime you're talking about ethics, not just related to health technology, which is to prevent boundary issues and violations on the provider's part is building our own resilience and our own self-care. So it's just a really important reminder. See, familiarity is key. Try not to prescribe things you wouldn't do yourself in the real world. Oh my gosh, that's such a good point. Can we steal Kaylee's point there and use it in our future trainings? I like that. Very good point. Yeah, if using T2 Mood Tracker 5 times a day sounds onerous, and it does, you wouldn't want to recommend that. It's a good, allowed. Oh, excellent. Thank you. We'll cite you. Okay, so quiz time. Not really quiz, but don't worry so much about which ethical standard. Let's instead worry about how do you respond. How do you respond if a new patient finds your email address in Global, sends you a message before you've had a chance to review informed consent? What do you do? Find your supervisor. Yeah, it's nice to have a supervisor, right? Consult. Yep. Hey, kiddo. Sorry, just trying to adjust the light back here so I'm not blinding everyone. Our patients can find us through Global really easily. You've been emailed spontaneously. Yeah, just requesting various things. Thanks for help. No, if you keep turning it, I'll take care of it in a minute. It's okay. So I also think it's appropriate to pick up the phone and let them know that, or have your admin do it if that's easier, and say, we have an appointment on Thursday. In the meantime, please don't email us. If you need to get in touch with us, you can contact us through secure messaging, or this is the phone number. That's a good point, too. You can also wait and respond until the session and then discuss informed consent. Also appropriate. There's no one right answer to this one. It's one of those where prevention is ideal, but sometimes it's going to happen. In our military treatment facilities, we can't adjust our informed consent, but what we can do is still discuss verbally informed consent about using health technology. And that's where I also, in the first sessions, also talk about social media. But what you can do is, if you're going to be discussing the use of PE coach, for example, for prolonged exposure therapy, discuss it with them, get their consent, and then document that. And the documentation can be as short as discussed treatment modalities, patient agreed to prolonged exposure treatment with use of prolonged exposure coach app to assist. It's something as simple as that is fine, and then you've got that documented. Final guidance is still coming out for telehealth visits, but at this point in the behavioral health world at least, the recommendation is still to get informed consent for behavioral health via telehealth at the beginning of every session, although I do think that differs from clinic to clinic, so check with your local policies, of course. Okay, next one, and I'm on slide 59 just in case here. Someone rates you negatively on Facebook or some other form of social media. What do you do? Hopefully that's better. Yeah, confidentiality. I mean, they're telling the world, hey, I saw this doc. Yeah, if you're still seeing the patient, it's worth discussing for sure. Certainly some transference there, to use an old-fashioned term for this. Yeah, I think it's worth discussing with them. It's grist for the mill. Yeah, it's going to happen, and there's nothing we can do about it, especially if they're no longer with you. I mean, this is where our own resilience and self-care helps establish more secure social media settings, for sure. But there are methods of commenting on just about everything in the world. Madigan has a Yelp page, so anyone can go and comment on us. Oh, yeah, you don't want to contact a terminated patient. Totally agree. And, yeah, freedom of speech. They can say whatever they want, you know. And frankly, I think other patients will probably not even look at those reviews very often. And if they do, I think, you know, it is what it is. People are allowed to have opinions. It is something to know that might happen, to prepare yourself emotionally for it. You know, I do podcasts, and I think this is probably a saying in many more realms than just podcasts, but they say once you get your first 1-star review, then you know you've really made it. So, yeah, not saying let's go try to get poor feedback from our patients, but it might happen. Nothing we can do about it. If you're still seeing them, it's probably worth discussing. And frankly, maybe there is something better that we could be doing to help them if they're not getting what they need. Okay. Feel free to keep commenting on that one.
Pop in real quick?
Of course, go for it.
So I saw someone said, you know, increase the security of your social media. And I think that is great. Your personal social media should definitely be at the highest security you can have it. So private, like with Facebook, setting it up so only your friends or friends of friends can find you, you know, using an alias. And then also, once you've set those settings up, make sure to check them at least twice a year. Facebook is notorious for changing them and not really notifying you. So, yeah, it can definitely surprise you when those things shift. And that's all I wanted to pop in with. Over.
No, I love that. Yeah, I actually put it on my calendar for a quarterly review of my Facebook settings, and also Twitter and Instagram. But Facebook is the worst, although they've gotten a lot better, I will say that, thanks to negative press. A story I like to share is that I used to have 2 Facebook accounts. One that's just my personal account where I've got my maiden name on there where I show pictures of the kids and all the ridiculous things they say so that the grandparents can keep up with them. And then a professional Facebook account that has like my fancy glamour shot in front of a flag and, where I post the things that we're doing at DHA Connected Health or then we were T2. And I was very, very careful on my personal page to keep everything locked down. And on my professional one, I made everything open to the world because it was things I wanted to promote for our work. But then one of my friends went to a party at their house with the kids, and they posted pictures and tagged Julie Kin, my professional account, in it, which meant that my followers to our blogs and all other things like that got to see in their feed pictures of me and my kids. So that was not a time when I was doing clinical work, fortunately, but still not great. Previously, I should have learned. Previously, when I was in graduate school or in my internship, I was working in a very small town, and so friends of friends were able to see a video of my kids that they had reposted. That was before I understood security settings on Facebook, so also not good. Bottom line, be careful about it. There are ways to really lock down your Facebook account. We're not going to go into all of those here because there's many, many blogs. You can Google it, but you can make it so that your account isn't even searchable, so that people can't tag you, for example. If you are a public figure, for example, if for some reason your role is something that is very public and you need to be able to have a presence, then there are ways to create a page for a public role where others can't tag you, etc. So anyway, it's worth looking into these things. There's lots of ways to lock it down, but like Renee said, the settings change. So logging in every once in a while and checking is really helpful. Okay. Dr. Smith has left your clinic and you've been assigned his patients. One of his patients shows you their mood tracker graph. You're not familiar with the app. How do you respond? Don't worry about which ethical standard, but what do? Patient brings you an app, doesn't have to be mood tracker, it could be any kind of app, and they say, yep, we've been using this. What do I do? I like that, Bridget. Yep. Yeah, be honest. I admit for myself, I think my first instinct would be to fake it and think, oh, I know apps and I can understand charts. Let me take a look at it. I'll help you interpret it. Not the right answer. Go with the second instinct, which is to be mindful of your own competency. First of all, it might not even be a good app. Who knows what it is that they've been using? You want to be able to evaluate it, but also to let them know, oh, I'm not familiar with this. Tell me what you like about it, or in what ways were you using it? I'd like to learn more about this, and then in the future we can use it together. If for some reason it's an app that you find problematic for some reason, then come with suggestions for other options. That said, let's say it's an app that you think, not so great, but it's not doing harm. I would encourage the patient to continue using it, and I would learn about it and use it as well, even if it's just a placebo effect kind of app, because the patient is engaged. What we want to prevent is a situation where a patient brings an app to a provider that they're interested in using, and the provider says, oh, sorry, I don't do apps. And that's a common thing we've heard before of patients being interested in using the tech and the providers being a few beats behind. Can you imagine if you're a patient and you've realized that your depression symptoms need help and you've gone to the trouble of looking for books and you finally found a book written by an author, it seems good, you found the book is really helpful, it has great worksheets in it, and then you bring that book to your new provider and say, yeah, one of the things I've been doing is using this book, and the provider says, sorry, I don't do books, right? That's ridiculous. We would never do that. But from the patient perspective, and it feels rejecting too, and demeaning to the patient, but it's the same kind of situation if a patient has done their homework and found an app that they like or that a previous physician or therapist has recommended. We want to leverage that patient engagement. If the thing that they have been using seems like it could cause harm or there's no basis behind it whatsoever and you can't ethically work with it, that's a different story. But in general, I think taking the time to learn about it and engage with it is a helpful idea. And as Kaylee put, competency. Yeah, you need to make sure you're competent to help. For example, if you're treating someone with PTSD and you're not trained in PE and they want to use PE coach, not a good fit. Or imagery rehearsal therapy. One of our great apps, this one I really do truly like, I didn't mean that in a sarcastic way, is Dream Easy for nightmare reduction. And that one is based on imagery rehearsal therapy for rescripting of dreams. You only want to do that one if you are actually trained in imagery rehearsal therapy, if you have the competency to use it. So even if they've already been using it, you need to take the time to see what it would require from you to use that app as well. Any other thoughts on this one before I move on? Okay, last one of these. Before introducing a mobile app, is it important to know whether a patient is a digital immigrant or a digital native? Before we answer this one, who can explain what this thing is, a digital immigrant, digital native? Is anyone aware of this, this term? That's an excellent guess. That's right. Yeah, you're both on the right path there. Exactly right. Digital natives, the whole time they've been alive, cell phones have existed. Internet connections were ubiquitous. The idea of emailing is something that predated them. It's only technology if it was invented after you were born, is one of my favorite quotes. For those of us who are digital immigrants, we still remember the first time we got an internet connection in our home, for example, or we remember the first time we switched from a functional phone to a smartphone. Email was something we had to learn. The idea behind this is that for some people, it is going to be much easier to use these technologies because it's always been there. They grew up with it. It's just a normal thing. It explains why our 5-year-olds can pick up an iPhone and start using it very quickly, whereas for us, it might take us a little bit more effort. That said, it's not a perfect description either. My 82-year-old mother is phenomenal with smartphones and technology and knows just as much about it as I do, and my partner does not. So there's, lots of different people out there. We can't necessarily depend on this. But what do you think? Is it important to consider digital immigrant versus digital native, and why? I'll say this. We're going to get into cultural considerations in a bit, and age is certainly one of those. For patients, I think it's less of a consideration than for us providers. Frankly, assuming good rapport, patients say, yeah, That's a good point. We're always asking them to try new things, whether it's a new therapy or a new type of tech. That's an excellent point. I think for providers, if you're experiencing or seeing in your peers some reluctance to use evidence-based health technology, some of it could fit into this paradigm of being a digital immigrant versus digital native. But again, remember, it's not perfect, and we can't necessarily judge someone's cultural or technology adoption based on age. I kind of already went over this a bit. With informed consent, you know, we always want to make sure that they understand what we're asking. You know, back to that role play that Renee and I did with the PE coach app. You know, I didn't get consent at all to use that. I didn't ensure capacity and comprehension by any means. Sure didn't understand whether it was voluntary. Maybe I documented it in EHR, who knows? But those are important considerations, at least until we get more formal guidance. You know, another important aspect is to address readiness to use tech. This is probably less and less important, the first point of being familiar with apps. I think most of our patients are already familiar with apps. That said, they may not necessarily want to use them for their healthcare, especially if they're extremely security-minded. So it's still important to meet them where they are. Consider patient preference in terms of using these mobile health tools. And also refer to our cultural considerations, which we're going to get to in a couple of minutes with Dr. Kavanaugh. Contraindications. You know, the big one, patient preference. Technology is not for everyone. They might love using tech, just not for their health care. Also, tech delusions or tech addictions, not going to be a good fit. And, of course, recent head injuries. During the first week after a head injury, we certainly wouldn't want to recommend use of apps, although to the caregivers and family members of someone who's experienced a head injury, some of these apps could be extremely helpful. Okay, so some ethical reminders here just to wrap up our ethics section. Just consider how you're going to do informed consent, especially since we can't really adjust our informed consent in the military treatment facilities. Be careful with electronic communication. We want to let our patients know right up front exactly how to get in touch with us to prevent some of those HIPAA-covered emails. Maintain our boundaries. Again, prevention here, especially with regards to social media. Seek venues to improve, sustain our competence, and that also goes into seeking ways to improve our own resilience. Okay, any last ethical questions before we go on to this next section? Or any other questions? Okay, well, with that, I'm going to turn things back to Dr. Kavanaugh.
Thanks, Dr. Tin. I'm freezing my face. So we're going to talk a little bit about ethical considerations. And we all were trained in different models. What kind of models are you all using to conceptualize diversity or cultural considerations in your practice? Like, for example, I was trained to use the addressing model. And if you're not using any, that's okay too. Okay, addressing. So it seems like the addressing model is, yes, cultural humility. Yes, that is great. So for a little bit of context, I did my internship training down at the VA in South Texas Valley Coastal Bend, so down in the valley. And I was coming from Portland at the time, Portland, Oregon, so that was a big cultural shift for me. And so really conceptualizing cultural considerations and variables. You know, it's a pretty unique culture down in the valley, and it took me a minute to kind of catch up and learn a lot about the nuances, especially with the Tejano culture. And so really looking at a patient's cultural variables as well as my own biases was really important, and attending trainings to really make sure that I was increasing my cultural competency. So just like we do with other cultural or diversity factors, technology can be a factor that we kind of consider. So a lot of things play into how we relate to technology. And these are some of our variables that we commonly see. So social economic status, military, ethnic, racial identities, their military status, and then also we can think about access to technology. So that could be how are they in a place where they can access technology readily? Can they afford to access technology? Are they on a restricted data plan because of financial burdens? And then how comfortable they are with technology. So some of that goes back to digital versus native. That can also just be, you know, I feel like there's sometimes a group where I grew up as technology grew, and so it's an interesting dynamic there. But yeah, that cultural humility coming at it where, so yesterday we had a lot of participants asking the question, what is the patient's relationship to technology? And I think that's a great question when we're talking about culture and looking at technology and our relationship with technology as another cultural variable. You know, coming in with that humility and letting a patient be the expert on their experiences with technology, that there's no right or wrong answer. We're just trying to get more of the data so we can really give them the treatment that can best suit their needs and talk about the options for treatment with them. And so now we're going to get into a little nuance. So Dr. Kent earlier kind of mentioned a scenario where a provider said, oh, no, I don't do apps. I've had that happen in my supervision when I first learned about apps. Down in the valley, it can be pretty rural. We were having, our catchment area was from Corpus Christi to South Padre Island, so the patients are coming pretty far to Harlingen and to McAllen. And, you know, I was looking for ways where I could continue supporting patients even though they were only seeing me once a month or, you know, every other week would be really impressive. And so, yeah, went to my supervisor. He was like, I don't like technology. We're not using it. Okay. But then a later supervisor was more enthusiastic, more comfortable with technology, and allowed me to kind of try using some of these apps out. But yeah, looking at what are your beliefs, what are your beliefs about technology broadly, and then using technology in practice. So these are really good questions to start that self-exploration that we know is important when we're doing cultural work. And so some of the key takeaways that we've talked about in this module are really understanding how technology can improve care, understanding what are your responsibilities, like ethically, professionally, to meet with meeting your client where they're at, and then talking about some of the best practices to really provide safe care that protects the patient and protects providers too. We don't want you guys risking anything. And also discuss some of the ways we can increase awareness about our technology biases and understanding and integrating that into our cultural conceptualization of patients' cultural factors. So we have got a polling question before we move on. So how often are you all seeing PTSD in your practice? So it looks like responses are slowing down. Give it one more moment before we close out the poll. All right, speak now or forever hold your peace. So it looks like about half of you are seeing patients, PTSD in your practice pretty frequently. Lisa, I think we're all done with the poll. Thank you. Which is understandable. PTSD is one of the most common health problems among U.S. service members and veterans. And so even if you're not treating PTSD directly, you might be treating PTSD indirectly, right? So we know that it is related to deployment, increases that. It can increase hospitalization of service members. And also, it has a high comorbidity with chronic pain, headaches, traumatic brain injuries, substance misuse. So even if you're not directly treating PTSD, you might be treating the effects of PTSD. For those of you who aren't seeing PTSD frequently or very frequently, are you seeing the comorbid issues like relationships or family stressors or health problems? Domestic violence, yeah. The anger management, irritability. Yeah, so I think that's correct. So some of the bigger issues like nightmares or sleep problems might be what they're presenting with first. I know I saw that a lot in primary care where, oh, I'm having trouble sleeping. And then we dug deeper and it's like, oh, I'm having nightmares about my traumatic experience. And that's sometimes a different path depending on patient's preferences or what's best for that case. And then moving on to the next slide. So this is just another funnel similar to the one that was with stress. So we did this for PTSD. And again, kind of it shows the exclusion criteria that we presented the clearinghouse market research team with. And here's their outcome of the mobile operating serial and the funnel. So after they funneled it, they rated the top 10 apps, and this is what they came out with. And it looks like PTSD Coach, the one that was created through the DOD and VA, was actually one of the highest rated apps for PTSD management. So that's always nice to see when our stuff comes up, because then we can talk more about it. Otherwise, we kind of just have to say, here's what is available. And so the top 3 apps that we see most frequently are the PTSD Coach, PT Mood Tracker, and PE Coach. But I also saw a lot of people saying that they're using CPT Coach. How are you liking that? Well, if you have anything to share about CPT Coach, feel free to put it in the response bar. we're not going to cover it today, but I'm always interested in hearing people's experiences with it. So really, PTSD Coach is another one of my favorite apps. This is one that I used a lot when I was in primary care. I worked at the VA primary care during the waitlist crisis, so there was a big pressure to see as many patients as we could. And also, there was a significant waitlist to get into PTSD services. So I was looking for, what else can I do to give patients that I was referring to support, because all of the handouts were being left in my office. And so my supervisor and I found this app through the VA DoD suite. And they just did a major update, so they refreshed the language, refreshed the graphics. Now it's in Spanish, which would have been really helpful for me when I was down in South Texas. It also allows you to kind of create favorites on the home screen, so the favorite coping tools can be easily accessible. And what I would do is kind of walk through the PCL with patients, and we'd use one of their symptoms and go through each of the modules. So the PTSD Coach has education, it's got coping, it's got assessment, and that also uses the PCL-5. And then it also has the coping and resources, the support and resources. Is anybody using PTSD Coach? Pass. And so with PTSD Coach, this wasn't made to be supporting a treatment. So how it was developed was to be a self-management tool for people with PTSD. And that's what the evidence has shown it's been really great for. So we know that when patients use it as a self-management tool, that it can decrease their PTSD symptoms over the course of time, and that it's appropriate for us to recommend this for the use of self-management. The last point, though, is the one that I found the most fascinating. So they did a study where they went into primary care, and they just did a 10-minute introduction of how to use the app, and they compared it to a group of patients who just got the introductions versus another group got clinician support every 2 weeks, like a 10-minute phone check-in. And both groups saw improved symptoms in PTSD. So even the 10-minute introduction, just walking your patient through the app, having them navigate it, learning them how to use it on their own, can help them manage. The clinician-supported group had a greater reduction in symptoms, and they reported being more interested in continuing treatment in the future. But that's just another way to use this app. So it's a pretty flexible app. It can support its coping skills training. Sometimes if people are waiting to get into a specialty clinic, you're just trying to prepare them for that deeper dive into some hard work. And so that's one of the reasons I really like this app, is the versatility. So now we're going to talk more about how to use apps for evidence-based weight management. And do we have any VA providers on the line? All right, going once, going twice, no VA. So I'll just kind of talk through this briefly. This is focused on, the app is focused on a VA treatment. So we know that weight and diet management is a big issue both nationally and for the services. We want our service members to be healthy and, be able to move with their bodies. And so right now, half of the service members are classified as overweight and obese. There's some problems fundamentally with BMI that are kind of listed below. It doesn't really take into account muscle. And so it's a concern for the DoD because of the cost related to it. And for the health, it can really impact mission. So the VA created a program called MOVE, and it's a weight management program. And so they created an app that goes with that treatment to support it. If you're not doing the treatment, I wouldn't recommend using the app. So they are meant to go hand in hand. Sometimes we do have VA providers, so we like to include it. But since we don't today, this exists. If you ever end up at a VA, I know there's one in San Antonio. If you switch over, this exists. So there are some of the features. So there's a guide and education, and then diaries and tools. But again, this is meant to be used with a manualized treatment. And so moving on to the polling question, how often are you all seeing depression in your practice? Sorry, I've got a cat. You're very talkative. All right, anybody else? Going once, going twice. Sorry. So it looks like over 80% of you are seeing depression either frequently or very frequently. And so I think we can close that poll out, Lisa. Thank you. So now we're going to talk about mobile health and supportive evidence-based treatments for depression. And I'm going to hand it off to Julie.
So before we jump in, should we push through or take a 5-minute break? Or a 10-minute break? Let me know in the break.
Sorry, yeah.
I'd like a break, but okay. Okay, well, Connor, you can stay while the rest of us take a break. Okay. Freaking cat introductions. Okay. Let's resume at 11:26, and we'll take 5 minutes. Operator, Melissa. Thank you so much, Melissa. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Is Ragdoll Mix an actual cat breed, or is that an interesting genetic mutation from your family? I don't know much about cats.
It's a breed. Ragdoll's a breed.
Oh, okay. It's for... okay. I didn't know. The first time I heard about Maine Coon cats, I thought that was fictional. I didn't realize that was oh, good to know. Okay. Yep. Okay. Welcome back, everybody. This is our last section before we get to kind of closing comments and additional questions. So, mobile health research for depression. In general, we've seen similar research that we've seen for the other areas we've talked about, which is that adding mobile health to treatment as usual definitely helps. Helps with adherence, helps with screenings, helps with symptom tracking, of course, and education. All these same areas. Same holds true for depression. And this is important since depression is so often co-occurring with many of the other areas we have been talking about. Here's another one of those app funnels that shows how we did an independent review of other kinds of health technology out there for depression. Again, there is so many when you first start searching, but we excluded the ones that had cost, the ones that were more about education and not necessarily tools, et cetera, et cetera. Now, here's another one of those charts that shows some of the apps that you might want to consider looking at. So, for example, back to when I was giving you my dream come true for your clinic, which is where you come up with a committee or you on your own as the health tech champion, and we can help you become a champion if you'd like. You do a review of what are the 1 or 2 apps, what are the 1 or 2 podcasts, book chapters, et cetera, that we're going to recommend that are vetted. If there's nothing from the DoD or VA that fit your needs, using one of these kinds of charts can be really helpful because we've already done some of that groundwork for you. Of course, we're not saying, yep, go out and invest in Pacifica, that's the app. By no means. We're saying these are ones that are probably a good way to start your search. And if you're looking at a unique subject area, we can help you with that too. Our whole point is we want to prevent folks in the DoD and VA from using apps that aren't safe, that aren't evidence-based. So we just want to make your job a little bit easier. Okay. Virtual Hope Box. We talked about this app before, but how many of you have ever used a Hope Box as part of treatment? Well, you know, I was just about to ask that question. We used to ask that all the time, and I realize now most of you are using Virtual Hope Box. But, okay, so some of you have done Hope Boxes, and many of you have done Virtual Hope Box. You may not know we based this app on a real-life common intervention for positive activities and reduction in depression, which is a Hope Box. It was actually a shoe box that we'd have the patient fill with pictures, coping cards, you know, in the form of those 3x5 index cards, a tape cassette back in the day, and then once we got more modern, a CD of favorite tunes, and, you know, other things that were just good reminders for living. And this was common treatment for folks after a suicide attempt or for, oh, okay, good. I'm not the only one. You remember these too, right, Bridget? Okay. And so then a few years ago, we were working with the VA and thinking, okay, well, we've got so many of these same capabilities in a smartphone. Why don't we make a virtual version of this? And so we created the VHB based on those original Hope Boxes, which aside from the tactile stimulus and smell sense, I guess, that we can't do yet, we were able to add even more. So in addition to having those pictures, those fantastic music that evokes good feelings, positive quotes, recordings of people giving positive benefits, coping cards, we were also able to put in distracting games and other kinds of things like that as well. Plus, the coping cards are a little bit easier than just giving someone a 3x5 index card. We walk the patient through doing the coping. And then we tested it in an RCT with veterans in Portland, VA, who were at risk for suicide. And we also wanted to see how was this for the providers. Again, with the mindset that generally our patients are a little faster to adopt this technology than we are on our care teams. We wanted to see, okay, is this needlessly complicating our treatment, or were the providers okay with this? And we did it across 3 different treatment programs in the Portland VA healthcare system. And in general, we had some fantastic oh, I guess I didn't have the results there. The results were great. Here's a picture of a traditional kind of Hope Box there, and decorated by the patient as well. Not only did the patients like it and help them adhere to treatment and promote health, but the providers liked it too, and it didn't disrupt their treatment, and they were able to fit it into their treatment. We did a pilot first and then the RCT, and this was several years ago now, so it probably did the pilot in 2015 or 2016 and the RCT shortly after. So it's still at a time when providers were just starting to use apps in treatment. And this is one of those apps that's been really fun to watch it progress, because that was the original reason for this app, was to help reduce symptoms of depression and to help with patients at risk of suicide. But what we've seen with VHB, and I'm curious if any of you have seen this, is that folks are also using it for anger management, or seeing it for people helping them get to sleep. We're seeing a lot of use among adolescents. Oh, Renee, I forgot. Oh, wow, 2013 was the pilot. Okay, so that was very early on. Didn't realize you were one of the RAs on it. Okay, cool. Small world. So you might find, not just with VHB, but with other apps too, there's lots of interesting ways when we create this technology that it ultimately gets used. So that's certainly the case for this app. Right now we're redesigning it, again, to update the look even more, make it a little bit easier to use. At the time that we designed this, we thought this was so high-tech looking, but now it's starting to look a little bit dated, so we're working on it. Yeah, right, the mahjong right before bed. I'm right there with you. Those of you who are using this, what do you like about it?
Well, people are typing. I had a patient that tapped, got to the highest level of the mahjong, and then was like, "What do I do now?" So yeah, it's very helpful for a distraction.
Yeah. Never levels. I like Sudoku a lot, except you can't play it near one of the members of our team because she will walk up to you and start giving you the answers, and that reduces the fun of it. It's Amanda Stewart. One of the things I like about it is the quotes aren't very sappy. Usually if you see inspirational quotes, they're, make people roll their eyes. But these ones are good, and you can add your own. So thing I like to do is I collect all the ridiculous things that my kids say, or some of the ridiculous things my kids say, and you can add those to the quotes as well, where there are funny questions and random stuff. If you haven't used this app, I suggest checking it out. Certainly not an app that's a panacea or perfect for everyone, but if you've got a patient who is in care for symptoms of depression, this is a really good evidence-based app that can help in all sorts of different ways and become a tool that they can rely on, or at least start to rely on and then build up those skills on their own for times when they're not doing well. And you can set it up with them in treatment, especially the coping cards. That can be a little tricky. I would recommend starting that with a provider rather than having them go through that tool on their own. Also, earlier, Renee talked about, oh, yeah.
Oh, when you're done, I just have
I might not stop. I mean, jump in when you can, Renee. As Renee was mentioning before, with virtual or Breathe to Relax has a fantastic breathing trainer. Some people like the breathing trainer in Virtual HopeBox even more because it does have an option. It has more options to add an end pause, for example, after intake of breath and breathing out. But it's similar functionality. So there's a lot in this app. It's not one size fits all, but because there's so much in it, it's nice and modifiable. And also for those same reasons, we like to in-group therapy. It was nice as a group to go around and help fill out the coping cards. On to you, Renee.
I was just going to say, from a health psychology view, I was trained when working with patients on chronic pain management to create a pain coping box. So similar to a physical hope box. And so I have actually used this virtual hope box with chronic pain patients, more the patients that are struggling with remembering some of the treatment, like pacing and relaxation, or that had comorbid anxiety or co-occurring depression. But it's been really helpful, especially the coping cards and the relaxation, to have all of those functions on one app over.
That's such a good point. Have any of you noticed unique methods of using this app? Well, just a quick guide here. A couple important things. One is that it does have this little phone icon in the top right for emergency contacts. Funny story, that's one of the icons we're changing because that icon isn't as meaningful anymore to our digital natives as it is to the rest of us. Anyway, one of the things we do at DHA Connected Health is we have a usability lab where we can take these kinds of apps and put them through with service members and beneficiaries to make sure that they function the way we intended them to and that they can get what they need. And that's helping us discover that, yep, that no longer means phone to some people. Okay. Let me think. I'm going to skip this due to time. Oh, wow, we are, okay. We are almost out of time. We only have about 20 more minutes. So before we get into our concluding materials and just our summaries, I want to stop here and see what questions you have. Again, we don't want to leave you with questions today. If there's something we can't answer, we'll look it up and get back to you. So let's just pause here for a minute. And before we do our next poll, let's talk about if there's any other questions or anything else you would like to hear about. There's no estimated time of arrival for this function. The question is, how can we figure out a way to actually share some of the self-monitoring data? In the VA, we're closer. The VA, Renee, maybe you recall offhand the name of the VA app that is essentially a secure web link that you can access from a mobile phone situation, and it works with similar to banking software with a token password situation where our beneficiaries can send secure data up and back to their providers. We don't have that yet in the DoD. It looks like it's still going to be some time before we can purchase that, but because of the emergent need for this and a personal health record, we're also looking at adopting what the VA's already adopted. Unfortunately, this is taking a very long time. I would say at a minimum, we're looking 6 months. And the only reason I would give it such a short time suspense is because of COVID-19. It's accelerating all of our tech adoption. Normally, I would have said it's probably going to be another 12 months, unfortunately. So let me ask you all a favor here. When you get your CEs later, oh, yeah.
Do you mind if I just pop in before we wrap up?
Please do. Yeah.
I wanted to kind of highlight some feature that is in most of our apps, which is the support feature. And whenever you're using apps with a client, I always encourage providers to identify themselves as a support so that they can easily call you and your office, not your home phone, obviously. And then also your patient's nearest emergency room. So you want to make sure, if you are in crisis, if your client is in crisis, they have the resources they need, and having it through, one place is always helpful. So for example, if you're using Virtual Hope Box, writing a coping card for someone who is experiencing suicide ideation, there can be some steps where it's, okay, adding a friend to that support, call a friend, call my therapist, call the crisis line, go to the ER. And so it helps patients kind of do that linear process, and again, without leaving the app over.
It's such a great point. Thank you so much for chiming in with that. An excellent reminder. So, as I said at the beginning, we're going to get some data from you in terms of how this went when you get your CEs, but if you have a chance, we would love for you to participate in our 2-minute survey. It's that first link that Lisa just posted, the SurveyMonkey link. It really is 4 questions. On there, we do ask approximately how many patients you see a year and with what percentage will you be using this technology. That helps us estimate or range. Don't answer any questions you feel uncomfortable with. On both that and the data and the J7 surveys, thank you. I know answering surveys are a pain and we're all sick of them, but we really will use this data. Don't worry, Renee and I aren't going to get our pay dinged if you give us criticism. We're hoping for the criticism so we can continue improving. Today, I know there's hiccups here and there because of us being in our living rooms. You all are so patient, and I am just deeply grateful. And hopefully one small silver lining from this is that we can learn from this experience and be able to provide future trainings. So please do let us know what you liked, what you didn't like, suggestions for improvement. And also, as I said, we're developing a lot more resources that you can get offline, so you don't need to be with us at the same time in a webinar to get them, and we'll be able to provide those to you and your leadership shortly. Okay, so you'll see in the chat pod the link to SurveyMonkey and also the instructions to get your CEs. Renee, do you want to take us through the rest of the slides?
Sure. So next step, so to obtain the CE credits, you have to go to that URL, the first URL, and enter the access code. The step-by-step instructions are here, but the thing that I really want you to pay attention to is that 14-day due date. So in order to get CE credits, you have to complete that post-survey within the post-test and the evaluation within 14 days of today. If you wait until 15 days and you email us and like, hey, how do I get that CE? There's nothing we can do. But the 14 days is really what you want to pay attention to here. So that will be part of our survey. We also will reach out to you in about 3 months, see how you're doing, give another very brief survey. And, you know, feel free if you have questions that come up or run into any issues clinically or are really needing help finding an app for a specific thing, then feel free to drop us a line. We can help you. If you need a prescription pad handout, we're here ready to go. So our information and resources are on page 36 of the mobile guide. And then these are our website. So that's our web address, is the Connected Health, and then the VA mobile apps that some we talked about are all located there. And that is our email address. If you have any questions or need to connect with us for resources or, you know, brainstorm or problem solve, and then our web address is right below it. And then the references, if people are interested in the literature that we cited today, all of our citations and references are available. Anything else or any parting words?
We'll stay on the chat for a little bit. So let's see, as soon as you register and take the quiz, you get your CE certificate immediately. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, Anne. So it should all happen right away. Even if you didn't register beforehand, just go to the link and use that access code. And we'll stay on the chat for a little bit just in case anyone has additional questions or problems. But, of course, email us anytime. On the link, it says I need registration confirmation. Suzanne, Lisa, do you know what that means?
Suzanne here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. So if you haven't registered, you do need to go in and register first, and then go in and complete the post-test and the survey. So in terms of registration confirmation, it should be pretty clear. If you have any questions, you can certainly reach out to us. If you've already registered, then you're going to go back in there, pull up, identify the course, complete the survey, complete the questions, and you should get it. So if you have any questions, let us know, but that is just, some folks did not go in and pre-register, so it becomes a two-step process instead of one. Over.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Okay, well, that concludes everything for today. But again, we'll stay on the chat pod, even though the phone line's going to go down, just in case for the next couple of minutes anyone has questions. Please do get in touch with us anytime. It's been a real pleasure to be with you all today, and we hope we will all be let out of our homes soon. So enjoy the isolation, stay well, get lots of sleep, etc.
Stay healthy, everybody. Thank you.